Chapter 176. He's an esteemed guest. All of you behave yourselves. Don't interrupt as you please. Sensing the changes in her subordinates' emotions, Jin Ying's expression turned cold, causing her subordinates to become much more obedient. Commander Xiao, it's an honor to meet you. After reminding her subordinates to behave, Jin Ying saw that Xiao Feng had already reached the second floor and was standing in front of her. She immediately laughed heartily. Xiao Feng noticed Jin Ying's enthusiasm, but he didn't show any reaction. Instead, he nodded and arrogantly sat down on a chair in front of the table. He crossed his legs and casually scanned the surroundings. This restaurant's decor is too old-fashioned. What he meant was that the place Jin Ying had chosen to meet him was a little too shabby. In response, Jin Ying could only smile and say, I originally wanted to invite Commander Xiao to a banquet in the Immortal Abode, but after considering that it's the Loyal Marquis territory, I'm afraid it'll be inconvenient. What's so inconvenient about it? We're mercenaries. We're only doing this because we took the Loyal Marquis money. Xiao Feng raised his head as if he didn't care about Yang Qindong at all. It seemed like Xiao Feng didn't put anyone in his eyes, but when he said these words, his little heart was thumping. He thought in his heart, Young master, you taught me to do all of this. It's not that I don't respect you. How could Jin Ying know this? After probing a little, she discovered that Xiao Feng and Yang Qindong were only mercenaries. She was overjoyed. As expected, mercenaries only recognized money and not people. In that case, if others could hire them, wouldn't it be the same if they had money too? As she rejoiced in this information, Jin Ying leaned forward and asked in a small voice, Then if our emperor is willing to pay money to hire you, would you be willing to work for him? Why not? Xiao Feng stared at Jin Ying as if this was a matter of course and there was no doubt about it. Jin Ying didn't expect to get the answer so quickly. She was overjoyed and sighed that this task wasn't difficult. She opened her mouth and said, If that's the case, how much did the Loyal Marquis spend to hire you? Our emperor is willing to pay the same price. No. I'll give you an extra 10%. Your emperor is willing to invite us? But what are you doing? Xiao Feng pretended to be interested and asked. It's nothing. We just hope that you can defeat the Walla's army that threatens the safety of the capital. Our emperor has also said that once you succeed, he will give you more silver. Jin Ying was afraid that Xiao Feng would be afraid of war, so she purposely emphasized on giving them more money. Tiger's Mane had previously spoken to Xiao Feng on behalf of Yang Qindong about what would happen if he met Jin Ying. He wasn't surprised at all that Jin Ying had said. Thus, when he heard this, he said as they had discussed, Eunuch Jin, I'm very sorry, but this isn't a problem with the money. Jin Ying, who had been prepared to talk incessantly and even wondered if she could get some more money from the commission for her own use, was immediately struck dumb by Xiao Feng's answer. She didn't understand. Just now they had said that they could be hired with money, so why couldn't they do it now? Seeing the confusion on Jin Ying's large face, Xiao Feng shook his head and seriously said, Eunuch Jin presumably knows that I am only a company commander and belong to a branch of the mercenary army. There are officers above me, so I can only report your request to the higher-ups. As for whether they will accept or not, that will depend on the higher-ups. What? You mean that your position doesn't allow you to make the decision on this matter? Jin Ying had thought that Xiao Feng was the head of the mercenary army, but to her surprise, he didn't even have the authority to make the decision. That's right, I truly don't have the authority to make the decision. Of course, if your emperor is willing, you can report the price first. I will immediately report the situation. I think it won't take long before we get a reply. Xiao Feng nodded and said in a businesslike tone. Upon hearing that he still had to report the matter, Jin Ying considered the current situation in the capital and realized that he probably didn't have much time to prepare. Thus, he anxiously asked, Then how long will it take for you to report the matter? That will depend on luck. If everything goes smoothly, it should be about a month or two. Xiao Feng pretended to be thinking very seriously, and after thinking for a while, he very cautiously replied. Yang Qindong had naturally thought of this answer so that Jin Ying wouldn't have any other ideas. Reality proved that when Jin Ying heard this answer, he immediately became listless. Only now did he realize that what Xiao Feng had said wasn't a problem with the money, but rather how to interpret it. This was Yang Qindong's method of giving people hope and then giving them disappointment. In order to prevent others from thinking that these mercenaries were directly related to him, he couldn't refuse Jin Ying's request, but he also couldn't fulfill his wish. In this way, the delaying technique could be put to good use. Jin Ying left in disappointment, not even offering a price. He probably also knew that if he waited for Xiao Feng to report the matter, who knew how long he would have to wait. At that time, whether or not the capital even existed would be up in the air. Trying to change the situation would be pointless. Upon returning to the imperial palace, Jining truthfully reported his meeting with Xiao Feng to Zhu Qiyu. At this time, Zhu Qiyu had already awoken from his rage at Yang Qindong's request, or perhaps it could be said that he was no longer so angry. When he heard Jin Ying's report, he let out a long sigh and said, "So, we can only agree to the loyal Marquis request?" "I'm afraid that's the only thing we can do," Jining weakly replied. The emperor trusted him so much, but if he couldn't even handle such a small matter, he truly felt that he had no face left. "Beloved official, what do you think of this matter? If I agree to the loyal Marquis request and allow him to set up a private bank, what kind of adverse effect will it have on us?" Knowing that there was no other choice, Zhu Qiyu began to face the problem of the Yang clan's bank. Jining had already begun to consider this matter on the way back from the restaurant. Since the mercenary route was not feasible, they could only face Yang Qindong. The matter of the bank had to be placed before them. Hearing Zhu Qixin's question, Jining hesitated for a moment, and then a vicious light flashed through his eyes as he said, "Your Majesty, this might not be a bad thing. You can agree to let him set up a Yang clan bank. As long as Walla retreats, won't your Majesty have the final say in your territory? What if the loyal Marquis is not here one day? Don't you think that the money in the bank will be confiscated? If that's the case? If that's the case, everything the loyal Marquis is doing now is just making a wedding dress for Zhen." "Beloved official, is this what you mean?" Zhu Qiyu originally had this idea, but he was the emperor. This kind of matter of getting rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness was not good, so as to avoid other people's gossip. However, Jining was completely different. He was just a eunuch. For someone who wasn't complete, it was normal for him to do anything. "Your Majesty is wise." Jining saw that Zhu Qiyu understood what he meant and immediately knelt on the ground and exclaimed, "Ah, good good." The problem was solved so easily. Zhu Qiyu couldn't help but be in a good mood. If that's the case, what's the harm in agreeing to his request? Not only that, we should also create momentum for him. How about this? When the Yang family bank is established, the imperial palace will also deposit some silver into it. Presumably with this emperor taking the lead, there will definitely be many people depositing silver, and the amount won't be small, right? Yes, your Majesty is wise. When the Yang clan bank is set up, it will be a fat pig. Once it's fattened up, your Majesty can slaughter it at any time and use it for your own purposes. Jining also chuckled at the side. At this moment, the two officials had malicious smiles on their faces. If Yang Qindong saw this, he would definitely be overjoyed. In the Yang clan manner, Xiao Feng had already rushed back and reported the first sentence he said to Jining from the beginning to the end of their meeting. If Jining was present at this moment, she would definitely be very surprised. Company Commander Xiao Feng, who had said that he didn't care about the loyal Marquis, was now so respectful and careful when he saw Yang Qindong. "You've done well. Go and have a good rest." Yang Qindong, who was very satisfied with Xiao Feng's performance, smiled and watched him leave. He knew that after this meeting, even if Zhu Qiyu didn't agree, he would have to agree. In this way, the Yang clan bank would be recognized by the imperial family, and its development would be just around the corner. Of course, with Yang Qindong's intelligence, it was impossible that he hadn't thought of Zhu Qiyu's revenge. However, killing him was undoubtedly a fool's dream. He would let the other party be happy for a while. When the Yang clan bank really became strong, it would be too late for regrets. Tiger's Mane, immediately send a message to Gao Xiong in Qiqin City. Have him transport all the gold stored in the city and plundered from the sea to the capital. I have great use for it. Yang Qindong gave the order after some thought. The matter of the Yang clan bank would soon be resolved. In comparison, this was a profitable business. With money, he would have a foundation for development. With money, he could do many things that he wanted to do. At that moment, he hummed a little tune as he walked towards the rear courtyard. There were 4 outstanding beauties waiting for him there, waiting for him to appear. Chapter 177. In the main hall of the imperial palace, the officials had gathered early in the morning for a meeting. There was only one topic for this so-called meeting: who should lead the army to battle Walla. In yesterday's imperial court, Vice Minister Su Yozhen of Taichang Temple had recommended that Marquis of Loyalty Yang Qindong lead the army. Zhu Qiyu had not agreed on the spot and had instead given the officials one day. Early this morning, this topic had become the first matter to be resolved. Last night, another report had come from the front lines. Commander and Commander-in-Chief Wuxia Count Shiheng had led a defeated army of less than 30,000 retreating toward Datong. There was nothing in front of Walla's army to block their path, and they were able to pass through Juyong Pass and head straight for the capital. This meant that the enemy would arrive at the capital in 7 days at the slowest and 4 at the fastest. If the capital was still unprepared, it would be broken through and everyone would be captured or killed. With the situation so grim, a candidate had to be chosen. Jining announced the news she had received last night in front of all the officials. There were those in the imperial court who were terrified, uneasy, and pale. Civil officials used their mouths while military officials used their sabers. In times of peace, etiquette came first and reason was paramount. This naturally created a situation in which civil officials suppressed military force. But in an emergency situation, reason naturally did not make sense. Trying to reason with the enemy was tantamount to telling a tiger in the mountains to switch to a vegetarian diet. How laughable was that? It was no different from walking into the tiger's den. When they saw that the war was unavoidable, the civil officials naturally shut their mouths. On the contrary, they even revealed expressions of fear. They were completely different people compared to how they were in the past, talking about the past and discussing the present. Who wouldn't be afraid of death? After repeated defeats, Walla's army had placed an enormous pressure on the officials. One could truly say that they paled at the mere mention of it. In this situation, now that there was a candidate to recommend, the officials naturally did not hold back on their praise. Minister of War Ming proposed that Marquis of Loyalty Yang Chendong lead the army. This new minister was truly rather afraid that if there was no suitable candidate, Dai Zong would have him lead the army into battle. If that happened, what difference would it be from sending him to his death? With the Minister of War taking the lead, the other officials naturally agreed. At this moment, they were treating a dead horse as if it were still alive. And it wasn't just the officials. Even Hu Xiao and Hu Changning, who had opposed the idea yesterday, were now among the officials who supported it. Not only did they support Yang Chendong leading the army, they also requested that he be given great authority. They also said that if the army could not be unified, countless variables could appear on the battlefield. Obviously, when they returned to the Hu estate yesterday, Yang Chendong's words could be considered to have convinced the Hu father and son, which was why they had such a change today. The crowd of courtiers almost unanimously supported Yang Chendong. Sitting high on the dragon throne, Zhu Qiu knew that the general trend could not be changed. At the imperial court, he ordered people to go forward and pass on the imperial decree for Yang Chendong to attend the imperial court. At this moment, the newly ascended emperor had clearly made up his mind. In the Yang clan manner, Yang Chendong wore a black gauze hat and a turtleneck shirt. There was a python pattern on the chest patch and a belt around his waist. He looked like a third-rank official as he sat in the main hall. Beside him, Hu Yen, Xiao Yin, Lady Shui, Lady Xiang, and Yang Duo were pointing and laughing. From time to time they would cover their mouths with their hands and chuckle. Clearly this was the first time they had seen the sanctimonious Yang Chendong. Is there something wrong with that? Seeing that the 5 women's eyes were so curious and changing, Yang Chendong finally couldn't help but ask if there was a problem. No, it's very good. I used to see grandfather and father dressed like this when they went to court. I just didn't expect 6th Lang to have such a day, so I'm very curious. Hu Yen covered her mouth and chuckled while shaking her head. She wanted to pretend to be serious, but no matter how she looked at it, she could not hide the smile on her face. There was really nothing wrong with Yang Chendong's clothes. If there was anything to blame, it could only be blamed on his young age. He was not even 20 years old, yet he was dressed so formally. It gave the girls a feeling that he was too dignified and ridiculous. Is there really no problem? Yang Chendong asked with some disbelief. He glanced at the women one by one. Apparently he did not believe Hu Yan's words just now. There's really no problem. Seeing the disbelief on Yang Chendong's face, 7th sister Yang Duo stood up. It's just because you rarely wear court attire, so everyone is not used to it. Yes, I'm also not used to it. Forget it, I won't wear it. Come, take it off for the young master. Yang Chendong also felt uncomfortable after wearing these clothes, so he simply decided to stay away from them. As he spoke, he really took off the court attire. Xiao Yin stepped forward to help and asked with doubt, 6th Lang, do you really want to take it off? Didn't you say that the emperor would send an edict to invite you to enter the palace in a while? There's nothing wrong with entering the palace, but who stipulated that I have to wear court attire to enter the palace? It's so awkward, so it's better not to wear it. Yang Chendong smiled and shook his head. In his heart he was thinking, I don't have the intention to be an official of the great Ming dynasty, so why do I have to abide by their rules? Besides, if I can't even make this decision and have this little freedom, then I'll be too pitiful. After taking off the court attire and changing into a new set of green clothes, Yang Qindong felt incomparably comfortable. He couldn't help but laugh. That's right. Nothing is more important than being yourself. You should also remember, unless it's an important occasion, you can wear whatever you want. Wear whatever is comfortable. Life is only a few decades, so don't be too hard on yourself. Just as he changed into a new set of green clothes, a eunuch came to pass on a message from outside the Yang family manor, asking the loyal marquis to immediately enter the palace. The emperor and all the civil and military officials were waiting for him. Tiger's Mane had already prepared a healthy horse. Yang Qindong nimbly flipped onto the horse and waved at the women behind him. Then, under the protection of Tiger's Mane and Qiu Vi, the first guard, he went straight to the capital. Hu Yen watched her husband leave. When she couldn't see his shadow anymore, she put on the appearance of a big sister. She turned around to look at Xiao Yin and the other two girls and said, Lu Lang has left. According to his instructions last night, we must immediately take action. Second sister Xiao Yin will stay in the Yang family manor to take care of the overall situation. Third sister Lady Shui and fourth sister Lady Xiang will go to the capital. As long as there are cheap properties and fields, buy them and register them. We'll listen to big sister's instructions. Xiao Yin, Xiao Yuxue and Dong Hanxiang hurriedly agreed. Yang Duo and her daughter were left behind. Seeing everyone start to get busy, their faces were filled with envy. At this time her thoughts were also changing. In her eyes, women were no longer just women who knew how to take care of their husbands and children. They could actually do many things. In the imperial court, the officials had been standing here for a long time. Some of the more impatient officials even looked out of the hall more than once, as if they were waiting for something. Amidst the anticipation of the officials, a eunuch's typical Drake-like voice rang out. The loyal marquis requests an audience. He's here, he's here. When the officials heard the shout, they hurriedly straightened their clothes and stood in place. Even Zhu Qiu, who was sitting on the dragon throne, subconsciously straightened his dragon robe and looked outside the hall with bright eyes. Amidst everyone's anticipation, the azure-robed Yang Qindong strode into the throne room. The last time he came to the throne room, it was the second day after he entered the capital. He had beaten Wang Go and received the treatment of beating the drum. Compared to before, this time he was less nervous and uneasy. The imperial court had long ago decreed that when entering the hall to meet the emperor, one had to wear the corresponding official robes. But at this time Yang Qindong was dressed in azure-robed and entered the imperial court, yet no one said anything. Even the censors, who loved to nitpick, acted as if they did not see him. Subject Yang Qindong pays respects to your majesty. My majesty is. Yang Qindong entered the hall and knelt when he was 10 some steps away from the throne. After allowing Yang Qindong to kneel in front of him, Zhu Qiu raised his hand and said, All right, loyal marquis, stand up and speak. Thank you, your majesty. Even though he did not like kneeling in front of the officials in the imperial court, there were some etiquette that could not be discarded. After answering, Yang Qindong slowly stood up. When he stood up, he stood there like a javelin, giving off the feeling that no matter what wind blew, he would not move. Standing among the officials was Hu Zhangning. He had been practicing martial arts since he was a child and had some skill. At this moment, when he saw Yang Qindong's performance, he could not help but have a thought in his mind. His son-in-law seemed to be a martial artist, and his strength should not be weak. But why did he not notice it before? Yang Qindong stood where he was. Zhu Qiu, who did not understand martial arts, naturally could not see Yang Qindong's true strength. His intuition told him that the loyal marquis was standing there with great vigor. Loyal marquis, we have summoned you to this hall to discuss matters. I presume that you also know what is going on? Walla's army is threatening the capital, and the officials have recommended you to lead the army. We also believe in loyal marquis, but are you willing to do your duty for the country? Even though he had already sent Jining to privately discuss this matter with Yang Qindong, he still had to do his duty. At this moment he still had to go through the proper procedures. This subject is willing to do his duty for the country, share his majesty's burden, and do his best for the peace and prosperity of the great Ming. Anyone could say beautiful words, and at this moment, Yang Qindong had put on a perfect display of the relationship between ruler and subject. Good. Zhu Qiu was elated to see Yang Qindong so readily agree. Loyal marquis, hear this. You are made general of swift cavalry, primary second rank, and left commander-in-chief of the 5 armies of the capital. You are in charge of the large and small armies of the capital, and you are in charge of all the soldiers in the city. Since he was going to be put in an important position, and at this critical moment, a promotion was only natural. As for controlling all the soldiers in the city, this was naturally because of the urgency of the situation, and he had no choice but to give Zhu Qiu this important authority. Zhu Qiu was keenly aware that this was a battle of life and death, so he naturally could not be careless. Chapter 178. This subject accepts the decree and thanks for your Majesty's grace. Yang Qindong knelt and bowed. Zhu Qiu had only accepted the decree and didn't make any promises. He knew that it wasn't enough to just give Yang Qindong military authority, and it was time to state the conditions that they had agreed on. Otherwise, if he didn't put in any effort, it would be equally dangerous. His gaze first swept across the officials before landing on Yang Qindong. This time, the Walla has invaded the borders and is heading straight for the capital, causing the capital to be in danger. I heard that the price of grain has skyrocketed, and the value of gold and silver has shrunk, causing the commoners to panic. With this in mind, we believe that this isn't only due to Ing Zongxin's defeat, but also due to the merchants taking advantage of the situation. Thus, we have decided to open a private bank among the commoners. Loyal and courageous Marquis, we wish to hand over this responsibility to you and request that you stabilize the price of goods in the capital in the shortest time possible. Are you able to do so? He first talked about the situation in the capital, and he didn't forget to mention the matter of Ing Zongxin's defeat. Then he threw out the idea of establishing a private bank and asked for Yang Qindong's opinion. These scenes made the officials feel overwhelmed. Only Yang Qindong had an indifferent look on his face. He had long expected such a result. This was originally a matter that had been discussed. Just as Zhu Qiu thought, if he was only given military authority and no other benefits, he might still defend the capital, but that was it. However, if he obtained enough benefits, he would be able to fight this battle beautifully. After kneeling and bowing 3 times, Yang Qindong finally revealed some gratitude. This subject is willing to establish a private bank and contribute to the economic development of the great Ming dynasty and the stability of the country. At the same time, this subject intends to change the name of the private bank to the Yang Family Bank. At that time, this subject will pay 2 million taels of silver to the national treasury every year as business tax. I ask for your Majesty's permission. A series of gasps could be heard in the hall. As for the matter of establishing a bank and changing its name to the Yang Family Bank, many people still didn't understand what was going on. However, there was one sentence that was very clear. That was, if a bank was willing to hand over 2 million taels of silver to the national treasury, that was equivalent to half of the annual agricultural tax. What kind of figure was this? It was also money that many officials could not earn in their lifetime or even several lifetimes. However, it was easily promised by Yang Qindong. How could people not be shocked when they heard it? For real. Emperor Zhu Qiu was the most surprised. If you don't manage the household, you don't know the cost of firewood and rice. These words were also applicable to the emperor. Originally, Zhu Qiu only wanted to be a yuan. She only saw the emperor's awe-inspiring appearance and how everyone responded to his call. However, after becoming the emperor, he realized that money was the most important thing in a country. Money was needed for a natural disaster. Building irrigation works required money. Building a city required money. More money was needed to raise officials and soldiers. In short, if one wanted to be a wise emperor who was praised by everyone, then he needed to use countless amounts of money to solve everything and strive to satisfy more people. This was the emperor's task. Although Ren Xian's rule was first and the national treasury was abundant, a lot of money was used in the Battle of the Tumu Castle. After the defeat, it was unknown how much money was needed to compensate the soldiers. Moreover, there were 2 emperors ruling at the same time. The income of a country was divided into 2 parts. As a result, it was foreseeable that in the future, there would be more income and less expenditure. Moreover, if he wanted to become a truly famous ruler, the task of unifying the entire country was a must. It was very likely that he would have to fight with Zhu Qishan. If he wanted to fight a war, who knew how much money he would need? As a result, how to generate income became the focus of the work in the future. At this time, Yang Qindong stood up and said that he would set up a Yang Family Bank and would be able to send 2 million taels of tax every year. How could this not make Zhu Qiu's heart blossom with joy? A Yang Family Bank could pay 2 million taels a year. If there were 10 such banks, then wouldn't the problem of expenditure be solved? Wouldn't they be able to deposit more taels into the national treasury? In his joy he couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Cough, cough. Jining, who was standing at the side, coughed softly. She used this method to remind Zhu Qiu of his loss of composure in front of the palace. At this moment the emperor also reacted. He quickly made up for it. Good, very good. Since the loyal marquis is so confident, we will deposit 500,000 taels first. Depositing 500,000 taels of silver was nothing to an emperor. This was just Zhu Qiu's way of expressing his support for this matter. Many thanks, Your Majesty, for being the first customer of the Yang family bank to deposit money. This subject will give you a monthly interest of 0.45%. That is 500,000 taels of silver. The monthly interest is 2,250 taels of silver. Yang Qindong quickly thought and gave an answer. With a monthly interest of 0.45%, that was 100 taels of silver. The monthly interest would be 450 taels of silver. 1,000 taels of silver would be 450 taels of silver. 10,000 taels of silver would be 45 taels of silver. This kind of interest was still very high. At least it was higher than the current interest of a modern bank. This naturally became a great temptation, causing the eyes of the other ministers to light up when they heard the result. 500,000 taels of silver. The monthly interest would be 2,000 taels of silver. That was enough money for many large families to spend for 2 to 3 months or even longer. Although there were very few people who had so much savings, they should have at least 50,000 taels of silver. This way, the monthly interest of the Yang family bank would be 200 taels of silver. No matter how one looked at it, it was appropriate. Not only were the officials shocked by this result, even Zhu Qiu was shocked by Yang Qindong's words. Loyal Marquis, do you know that the words of the emperor are not joking? This subject naturally knows. Your Majesty only needs to prepare the silver. Once we win this battle to protect the capital, the Yang family bank will quickly be established. At that time, Your Majesty only needs to send people to deliver the silver and then collect the monthly interest. Yang Qindong said with confidence. Although the interest of this deposit was not low, it was nothing compared to the interest he set for the loan. As a modern person, he naturally knew that money only had an important use in circulation. If everyone saved their silver and did not use it to stimulate consumption, the progress of society would be much slower. Zhu Qiu naturally believed Yang Qindong's words. In front of the officials he said, "Good, then we will wait for the opening of the Yang family bank." Ah! With Zhu Qiu's laughter, the court session came to a successful conclusion. However, when the officials walked out of the hall, not many of them revealed relaxed expressions. First, they still doubted whether Yang Qindong, who was not even 20 years old, really had the ability to protect the capital. Second, was opening that bank really that profitable? If so, should they deposit their money in it? The officials all had their own thoughts. Yang Qindong did not leave with the officials. Instead, after watching Emperor Zhu Qiu leave, he was called to the side by Jining to discuss the details of the next step. Jining was resting in a courtyard within the palace. In a pavilion built on water, the two of them sat facing each other. Loyal Marquis, have a taste of this duke's tea leaves. Jining was all smiles. The defense of the capital would depend on this person, so this was naturally not the time to be giving him the cold shoulder. On the contrary, he was waiting for Yang Qindong to state his conditions, the treatment of the mercenaries. Both Zhu Qiu and Jining were keenly aware of this. They had placed Yang Qindong in command not because of his military talent, but because he could directly order the mercenaries with the new firearms. Even Yang Qindong himself knew that relying on the 10,000-some soldiers in the capital was simply not enough. In the end, he still had to rely on the new soldiers he had trained. Since this was the case, he naturally had to obtain enough benefits. Otherwise, this opportunity to demand an exorbitant price would be hard to come by again. The tea leaves are pretty good. It seems that eunuch Jin has some good stuff, Yang Qindong said with a dazzling smile, seemingly very satisfied with Jin Ying's hospitality. Since this was a negotiation, a relatively harmonious atmosphere was naturally of utmost importance. It was not a life-and-death battle between two enemies. It was just a matter of money. This required excellent patience and a good atmosphere. Haha, loyal Marquis, you praise me too much. This duke is simply being rewarded by his majesty. Jining threw his head back and heartily laughed, his good mood written all over his face. How could he not know that this was an opportunity for Yang Qindong to ask for benefits, as well as an opportunity for him to obtain benefits? Although the two of them were very different in age, they both had the heart of a fox. Using a large fox and a small fox to make up the situation was not excessive at all. As expected, His Majesty's rewards are always the best, Yang Qindong said with some emotion. Then he brought up the main topic. But I wonder what kind of reward His Majesty will give for using the mercenaries this time? Finally they talked about the main topic. At this moment, Jin Ying's expression became much more serious. But I wonder how many mercenaries loyal Marquis has invited this time, and what are their chances of defeating Walla's army? It seemed that Jin Ying was much more mature than Yang Qindong, as if he had always held the initiative. Yang Qindong did not care about this. With the mercenaries in hand, the initiative was in his hands. As for who made the first request in his opinion, it did not matter. This was not an equal negotiation and transaction to begin with. Haha, how much chance of victory there is, how many mercenaries can be invited to help, all depends on how determined His Majesty is. Yang Qindong picked up the teacup and took a sip. At the same time he spoke with confidence. Chapter 179. Oh? Based on what you're saying, if the Emperor's reward is enough, we can definitely win this battle? Jin Ying was not very interested in Yang Qindong's boasting. He was just a young boy who was not even 20 years old. He had only been on the battlefield once and relied on his so-called advanced firearms to save Zhu Qizhen. Did he really think that he could treat all the heroes of the world as if they were nothing? Could he really treat the Tile army as if they were invisible? Wasn't he being too arrogant? Jin Ying wanted to strike a blow at Yang Qindong and weaken his momentum. Then, during the negotiations he would have more power to take the initiative and naturally be able to obtain more benefits. Yes. Marquis has absolute confidence, Yang Qindong replied confidently. There was still a calm smile on his face. How could he not see Jin Ying's intentions? How could he not know that war was ever changing? Logically speaking, even if you had great power you could not speak too confidently. But this time he was going to do the opposite. He had absolute confidence that he could win this battle. All of this came from his confidence in the firearms in the warehouse and his absolute trust in the cold front. He was about to bring the tea to his mouth and see how Yang Qindong would answer his question. As long as he said something that lacked confidence, that would be the time for Jin Ying to press the issue. Then, when the time came, he would be able to lower his demands to the minimum. Then, he would be able to make a contribution in front of Zhu Qiyu and think of a way to obtain more benefits for himself. However, before he could drink the tea, Yang Qindong had already given him an answer. It was an answer that was certain and confident. He said that he had absolute confidence in defeating the Walla's army. This answer was completely out of Jin Ying's expectations. After a moment of shock, a cautious light flashed through his eyes. He said, Marquis, war is not a game. You can't just talk about it casually. You have to see blood and kill. Of course Marquis knows this. When Marquis saved Ying Zong and the 9 important officials at Tumu Castle, he also saw blood. Who knows how many of the Walla army died at Marquis' hands? Of course I know this very well. In response to Jin Ying's question, Yang Qindong responded with a smile. He looked very casual and confident. Marquis, are you that confident? This time, you're not trying to break out of the encirclement while the Walla's army is not paying attention. Instead, you're trying to stop the enemy outside the country? Then you might be facing a large group of the enemy's army? Jin Ying's tone of voice was still somewhat skeptical. When the Tumu Castle was defeated, it was true that Yang Qindong had saved Ying Zong and the 9 important officials. But at the time, he had chosen to go in the opposite direction of the enemy. He had not taken the shortest path back to the capital, but had instead circled around to the enemy's empty rear. Jin Ying had long ago had the embroidered uniform guard investigate this matter. It was precisely for this reason that he believed that while the strength of the mercenaries was impressive, they could only fight on a small scale. In a real battle, these so-called new firearms would not be of much use. Based on what he understood, Jin Ying did not believe that the mercenaries were omnipotent and invincible. But what he did not know was that the reason he had chosen to go to the enemy's rear rather than to protect Ying Zong was because Yang Qindong had intended to do so. He had done this in order to prepare for the simultaneous reign of 2 emperors and give Zhu Qiyu enough time to ascend the throne. Otherwise, if he had really taken the shortest path to the capital with the Lung Feng army, how could there have been the matter of Zhu Qiyu ascending the throne? Of course, Yang Qindong wouldn't explain this to anyone. Otherwise, everyone would know what Sima Zhao's intentions were. It was precisely because he could not explain this matter to anyone that Jin Ying had misunderstood. He thought that the mercenaries were only slightly stronger than ordinary soldiers and were not truly invincible. Since he had questions, he naturally had to answer them. In response, Yang Qindong smiled and said, Marquis said that we can defeat the Walla army, so we can naturally do it. Of course, this all depends on how much silver His Majesty can give us. As the saying goes, before the troops and horses move, the provisions move first. I'm sure eunuch Jin understands this principle. This is only natural. Jining nodded. Seeing young Qindong so confident and giving such an absolute answer when asked about the outcome of the war, the great eunuch was very curious as to how much this person wanted. Since the loyal Marquis is so confident, this is naturally a great thing. Presumably, when we really win the battle, the Emperor and the common people will definitely be grateful to the loyal Marquis. However, I wonder how much money it will cost. There's no need to say thanks. As a subject of the great Ming dynasty, one of Marquis' responsibilities is to defend the country from the enemy. At the very least, the amount of silver is not what Marquis wants. It's just that the strength of the mercenaries is too great. The price to pay for their help is very high. Yang Qindong looked as if he wanted to explain in detail, but he was interrupted by Jining. Alright, we are all understanding people and smart people. There's no need to go into so much detail. You only need to tell me the amount of silver you need. When the time comes, I will naturally report it to His Majesty. Jining interrupted Jining. This was her way of expressing her reluctance. At the same time, it was also a signal that everyone was understanding people. There was no need to beat around the bush. It was better to directly state the amount of benefits needed in order to be willing to work. Jining felt that she had seen through the loyal Marquis. Yang Qindong did not explain this. There were many things that had to be told in the end. Before that, everything would be in vain. He only chuckled and said, Eunuch Jin is a straightforward person. Since that's the case, Marquis will not be pretentious. How about this? We need this amount to win this battle. As he spoke, Yang Qindong extended his right index finger. 1 million. Jining chuckled. She had thought that Yang Qindong would ask for an exorbitant amount. However, when she saw that he had only extended a single finger, she immediately laughed. Young people were young. Their appetite was small and their determination was lacking. He had exposed his bottom line so quickly, and it was only 1 million taels of silver. Chuckling, Jining once again brought the tea to her mouth. The corners of her mouth curled up into a mocking smile. Yang Qindong also chuckled. He was in no hurry to explain. When he saw Jining pour the tea into her mouth, he suddenly said, I think eunuch Jin has misunderstood. It's not 1 million but 10 million. As expected, she spat out a mouthful of tea. Seated across from her, Yang Qindong was prepared. He casually tilted his body, allowing the tea to fly past him without splashing on his body. Jining did not care about this sudden loss of composure. He didn't even ask if the tea had landed on Yang Qindong. Instead, he glared at the person in front of him. After around 4 or 5 breaths, he clenched his teeth and squeezed out each word. Loyal Marquis, this is not the way to ask for benefits. Even if the capital is somewhat dangerous, this is not the time to ask for an exorbitant amount. Although she warned Yang Qindong, she was inwardly cursing his greed. 10 million taels of silver? Did she think that silver could fall from the heavens? If there really was 10 million taels of silver, who knew how many soldiers could be trained and how many elite divisions could be created? No. Yang Qindong raised his right index finger and shook his head. This isn't asking for an exorbitant amount. This is just how much the war needs. If it can't be satisfied, then it's fine. Marquis won't lead the army. Yang Qindong leaned back in his chair, his relaxed expression seeming to say that he had not asked for this matter. Someone else had asked him to do it and he was only reluctantly doing it. Yang Qindong had an indifferent look on his face, as if he had no interest in this so-called military authority. As a result, Jining felt as if she had punched cotton. Having Yang Qindong lead the army was a matter that had been decided in the imperial court, and it could not be easily changed. Not to mention, apart from Yang Qindong, there were no other suitable candidates at the moment. If they randomly sent someone and lost the war in the end, the consequences would not be acceptable to everyone. Jin Ying's expression changed again and again. She took 2 quick breaths and suppressed the anger in her heart. She opened her mouth and said, Loyal Marquis, even if you say that before the troops and horses are mobilized, the provisions will come first, but isn't 10 million a little too much? Not at all. Seeing that Jining was beginning to take his request seriously, Yang Qindong had a carefree smile on his face as he said, Eunuch Jin probably doesn't know, but for the sake of victory, I invited 300 more mercenaries. Together with the 100 left in the capital, that's a total of 400. Is this correct? That's how the bill is calculated, but there's no need for 10 million taels of silver. Jining was naturally overjoyed to hear that another 300 elite mercenaries had come, but she was still a little conflicted about 10 million taels of silver. Yang Chendong didn't mind and continued to calculate. 400 mercenaries. Normally, each of them would cost 10,000 taels of silver. I trust that eunuch Jin has heard of this before. Correct. Although 10,000 taels of silver per person is a high price, if they truly do have exceptional fighting strength, it's still barely acceptable. But even so, it's only 4 million taels of silver. Where did 10 million come from? Jining anxiously retorted. Eunuch Jin, there's no need to be in such a rush. Wait until Marquis has finished calculating the bill before you speak, alright? A hint of displeasure appeared on Yang Chendong's face. Presumably, anyone who was constantly interrupted would be unhappy. Chapter 180. Alright. Forget about the loyal Marquis for now. I will listen. Jining was very good at reading people's expressions. Otherwise, he would not have been placed in such an important position by Zhu Qiu. He naturally noticed Yang Chendong's displeasure. In order to prevent the situation from becoming tense, he could only obediently shut his mouth. Jining did not interrupt. Yang Chendong's expression became better. He continued, normally, it is true that hiring a mercenary soldier for a mission costs 10,000 taels of silver per person. However, the same mission should not be of different levels. For example, some missions are simple and easy to complete. Of course, this price is acceptable. However, this time we are fighting with fewer people. If we use the previous price to calculate, it will not work. I won't hide it from eunuch Jin. Marquis had already seen the urgency of the situation. Thus, he had already discussed with the leader of the mercenary soldiers. He asked for their help at a price of 20,000 taels of silver per person. Only then did he convince them. Based on this calculation, 400 people would be 8 million taels of silver. Adding on the military expenses and food for the 10,000 soldiers of the city defense army, it would be at least 1 million taels of silver. In the end, the remaining 1 million taels of silver is for eunuch Jin's hard work. I believe eunuch Jin will not refuse. Based on this calculation, Marquis is the one who is doing the work but not getting anything out of it. So, finally he finished speaking. However, after he finished speaking, Yang Chendong purposely acted as if he had been greatly wronged. It was as if he had done all this for nothing. Sitting there and listening, when he heard that the cost of hiring 400 elite soldiers was 8 million taels of silver, his eyes widened. His face was filled with disbelief. It was no wonder he was so surprised. With 8 million taels of silver, he would be able to find a way to scrape together millions of soldiers. However, there were only 400 soldiers going to battle. This ratio was too great. However, when Yang Chendong finished speaking and said that he had left him 1 million taels of silver, Jin Ying's expression became much better. She sighed inwardly at Yang Chendong's sensibility. No wonder this person could become good friends with Wang Zhen. This kind of consideration for his friends was very likable. However, when he thought about it from another perspective, 10 million gold coins was a large expenditure. When he reported it to Zhu Qiu, there was a chance that he would be rejected. Thus, he said with a bitter expression, "Loyalty Marquis, this duke appreciates your good intentions. However, 10 million gold coins is truly too much. See if you can reduce it by half. This duke's share can also be reduced by half." Jining endured the pain as she thought about how she had gained both the benefits and Zhu Qiu's favor. In this way, her benefits would be reduced by a total of 500,000 taels. With this money, he could have more people become his trusted aides. This was an extremely good thing for increasing his strength. She really wanted to be a whore but also wanted to set up a memorial archway. Yang Chendong despised Jining in his heart, but he spoke with certainty, "My 9 million is not 1 tael less." Of course, if eunuch Jin wants to be more spirited, then 9,500,000 taels will do. Clearly, the 500,000 taels that Yang Chendong asked for were the 500,000 taels that were given to Jining. The amount didn't change. The only thing that changed was her share of the benefits. How could Jining be willing to accept this? She shook her head and said, "How can this be? Since it's like this, then 10 million taels will do." Just as she finished speaking, Jining continued with a worried expression. "But loyalty Marquis, I'm afraid that His Majesty won't agree to such a large sum of money at once. Also, I'm afraid that the Ministry of Revenue won't be able to gather so much money in such a short time." Seeing that Jining had accepted this reality, the corners of Yang Chendong's mouth curled up into a smile. Eunuch Jin doesn't need to worry about this. Marquis has already thought of a solution for His Majesty. the national treasury won't be able to take out so much money in such a short time. It's fine to say this to others, but I'm sure that Eunuch Jean and Marquis both know this. But to take out 10 million taels of silver at once, I'm sure that even His Majesty's heart will ache. If that's the case, the national treasury can take out an advance of 5 million taels of silver. I'm sure that this amount should be enough to convince His Majesty. Jining was naturally overjoyed to hear this. That's right. If it's only 5 million taels of silver, it will naturally be much easier to convince His Majesty. But this way, how can we convince the mercenaries? Do we have to give them the money in installments? Of course not. How could the money used for war be given in installments? That would create a major problem. Yang Qindong shook his head. If it can't be given in installments, then what about the remaining 5 million taels of silver? Jining was somewhat confused by Yang Qindong's words. Don't worry, Eunuch Jean. Marquis thinks like this. Aren't there still many properties belonging to the imperial household in the capital? For example, the deeds to many houses and residences belong to His Majesty, so it's better to sell them to Marquis at a discount. Think about it, if the capital really can't be protected, these things can't be taken away just because His Majesty says so. It's better to sell them to Marquis at a discount and use them as the 5 million taels of silver. As for Marquis, he'll naturally find a way to gather the 5 million taels for war. Eunuch Jean will also need to make a trip to the newly appointed Minister of Revenue, Jean Lian. At the very least, no one will be lacking in benefits. Chuckling, Yang Qindong set his sights on the best houses in the capital. This was one of the goals of his trip. It was said that the antiques of prosperous times were the gold of troubled times. In truth, houses were also extremely cheap items in troubled times. At crucial times, everyone would be thinking about saving their lives, so who would buy a house? At that time, even if it was given away for free, no one would dare to stay. Yang Qindong understood this principle, so how could Jining not? With the Walla's army approaching the capital, the people were panicking and house prices were plummeting by the day. Even so, there were still more people selling than buying. One could say that houses were the most worthless thing in the world. And if she could convert this worthless thing into money and give it to Yang Qindong, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? With these houses, Yang Qindong would probably have to do everything he could to protect the capital. This seemed like a perfect solution, and it would be much easier to use this as an excuse to persuade Zhu Qiu. Not to mention he would be able to earn some money from buying and selling the houses. As for the Bureau of Revenue, given his status, who would dare to stop him if he wanted to do something? When she thought about how she could get this job done and still make a profit, Jin Ying's complexion visibly improved. Good, the loyal Marquis's intentions are good. Since this is the case, this association will immediately report to His Majesty. I presume that this matter won't be too difficult to handle. Jin Ying regained her confident expression. It was as if everything had returned to her control. After negotiating the terms, Jin Ying wanted to see the Emperor, Zhu Qiu. Her eyes were filled with eagerness. In response, Yang Qindong showed no intention of rising. Instead, he raised his teacup and leisurely said, Eunuch Jean, there is one more matter that I don't know if you know. Marquis has suddenly been suspended from his post in the embroidered uniform guard. Now that I mention it, this was a post that His Majesty personally conferred upon him. For what reason? Jining had been thinking about how to report this matter to Zhu Qiu when she heard Yang Qindong's words, and her face instantly paled. There was such a thing? This eunuch was unaware. Oh, then it must have been a subordinate acting on his own initiative. Haha, speaking of which, it's just a post as the commander of the embroidered uniform guard. Marquis doesn't care much about it. However, now that the entire nation is focused on fighting against foreign enemies, if people find out that Marquis has been suspended from his post, it's inevitable that some people will let their imaginations run wild and think that Marquis has done something wrong to incur the Emperor's wrath. If that's the case, it's extremely disadvantageous for Marquis to lead troops into battle. Yang Qindong spoke with a faint smile, but it was clear that there was still a trace of anger in his eyes. He was clearly a little angry. Jining was indeed unaware of this matter. Although the commander of the embroidered uniform guard was his trusted aide, L.V. Gue, he didn't report everything to him. His main duty was to stay by His Majesty's side. Only when something major happened would he report to him. Therefore, when he first heard Yang Qindong say that he had been suspended from his post, he was stunned. When he heard the consequences of this, he felt that the matter was a little serious. At this moment, Yang Qindong's authority was not to be questioned. Otherwise, how could he lead troops into battle? How could he carry out orders and prohibitions? Marquis of Loyalty, I really don't know about this matter. Your post as the commander of the embroidered uniform guard was indeed conferred by His Majesty. Even if something happens, it should be up to His Majesty to decide. This time LV Gue and the others have overstepped their boundaries. I ask that Marquis of Loyalty not take issue with them. Now, I can announce that your post as the commander of the embroidered uniform guard has been reinstated. After this, I will find LV Gue and have him apologize to you. Jining, who knew the importance of this matter, immediately expressed his opinion and placed Yang Qindong in an important position. Alright, then I'll have to trouble Eunuch Jin. Since that's the case, Marquis will go to patrol the city and meet with the generals. Alright, I'll have to trouble Eunuch Jin to hurry up with the matter of the silver. Walla's army will soon arrive at the city. If they aren't in place by then, Marquis can't guarantee that the soldiers will fight with their lives. As for the matters at the Ministry of Revenue, I'll arrange for my cousin Yang Fu to go there. If there's anything you can discuss it. Yang Qindong finally stood up. He had said what he needed to say and done what he needed to do. It was time to prepare for the war. Good. Don't worry, Marquis of Loyalty. I'll go see His Majesty now. The silver will be quickly sent over. Alright, I'll have to trouble Eunuch Jin. Alright, LV Gue should be Eunuch Jin's man. Since that's the case, when the silver arrives, ask him to find Marquis to get your 1 million taels. Yang Qindong chuckled, then cupped his fists and bowed before leaving the palace. Chapter 181. Yang Qindong had specifically asked Lu Gue to come and get the silver. It was clear that he wanted to make things difficult for Lu Gue and take revenge for his previous suspension. How could Jining not see that? She just thought that since Lu Gue had been wronged, then he had to pay the price for his mistake. It was just lowering his head and admitting his mistake. Presumably, Lu Gue did not have the guts to not listen to her and not lower his head. After Yang Qindong left, Jining went to the palace where Zhu Qiu was resting. She picked out some things that could be said about what had just been discussed. When Jining said that Yang Qindong needed 10 million taels of silver to guarantee victory, Zhu Qiu was shocked. What? Does fighting a battle require so much silver? It was no wonder that Zhu Qiu was so surprised. Ever since he had taken the throne, he had never experienced this. Previously, when Shi Heng had left the city to fight, he had been in too much of a hurry. He had only asked the Ministry of Revenue to replenish some provisions before leaving. At that time, Zhu Qiu was still trying to stabilize his position and did not think too much about it. Now, when he heard that fighting a battle required so much silver, he was naturally surprised and even shocked. He continued to listen. When he heard that he only needed to pay 5 million taels of silver and the rest could be offset by real estate in the capital, he breathed a sigh of relief. However, he still had a stomach full of doubts. My dear subject, does fighting a battle require so much silver? Although Jining was very trusted by Zhu Qiu and held great power, she also knew that the emperor's inquiry could not be concealed. Otherwise, once she lost the emperor's favor, she would lose everything. Your Majesty, normally we don't need so much money to fight a war, but this time we used the loyal Marquis. He also invited the mercenaries with advanced firearms to help. More than 80% of the money is for them to use. According to what the loyal Marquis said, the ammunition for that kind of firearm is very expensive. Moreover, with our great Ming's technology, it is impossible to make it. That is why the price is so high. I see. After listening, Zhu Qiu couldn't help but sigh and say, my great Ming dynasty has a vast territory and abundant resources. Why can't we make an advanced firearm? After this battle, we have to urge the weapons workshop to hurry up and develop them. Your Majesty is wise. This subject will remember this matter. However, do you think we should agree to the request of the loyal Marquis? The situation is perilous and the Tile army can arrive at any time. If we don't settle down and miss this chance, the capital will be in danger. Jining anxiously asked Zhu Qiu, still thinking about the benefits that belonged to her. Promise him. As long as we can protect the capital and repel the Walla, all he needs is some money and property. What's wrong with giving it to him? Just as my beloved official said, this is my country, my world. Everything here belongs to me. Naturally, I can take back what I have given away at any time. Zhu Qiu stood there with his back straight and his eyes looking into the distance. At this moment, he exuded the aura of an emperor. When these words reached Jin Ying's ears, he couldn't help but kneel on the ground in submission. Your Majesty is wise. This subject will do as you say. Jining left. After receiving Zhu Qiu's decree, the Ministry of Revenue quickly took out 5 million taels of silver and sent it to Yang Qindong's immortal abode. Yang Fu was also invited to the Ministry of Revenue to discuss the matter of property. Although Yang Fu was Yang Qindong's older cousin, he had long been impressed by his younger cousin's methods in Jianghu Prefecture. Later on, because of his outstanding performance, he had been assigned to manage the realm beyond heaven and the immortal abode, wielding great authority. Now that Yang Qindong had arranged for him to go to the Ministry of Revenue to discuss matters, how could he dare to be negligent? After meeting with his younger cousin and understanding Yang Qindong's intentions, he set out. With the money and provisions gradually arriving, the commander-in-chief Yang Qindong began to get busy. The first thing he did was summon the commanders of the central, eastern, western, southern and northern cities, the 5 commanders of the 5 armies, to the immortal abode for a meeting. Yang Qindong had been made general of swift cavalry and left commander of the 5 armies of the capital. He was in charge of all military affairs in the capital, large and small. The order to control all the soldiers in the city had been passed down long ago, and the 5 commanders were all waiting for Yang Qindong to summon them. When the order arrived, the 5 commanders were escorted by a few personal guards to a private room on the 2nd floor of the immortal abode. As commanders of the 5 cities' military office, they were also called commanders. Their positions were not very high, only at the 6th rank, and they were considered military officials. In an environment where the emphasis was placed on literature and the suppression of military might, generals were not valued, and they were even inferior to some of the 7th rank civil officials. In a place like the immortal abode they rarely visited. Their positions were low and their incomes were low. Even when they occasionally visited, they would only be looking for a seat in the main hall. They rarely even visited the private rooms on the 1st floor, much less the private rooms on the 2nd floor. Only Platinum Card members were allowed to enter, and these were people who were either extremely wealthy or extremely noble. This time they had been summoned by Yang Qindong to enjoy such treatment. When they reached the 2nd floor they were extremely cautious. Even when they saw the azure-robed Yang Qindong in the private room, they were still very cautious. "You're all here. Take a seat." He looked at the 5 commanders of the 5 armies. They were Tao Jin, Yang Jie, Gao Li, Mao Fushou and Sun Tong. As generals in charge of defending the capital, there was a limit to what they could do. No one could have imagined that someone would come knocking on their door, so these 5 were not skilled fighters. On the contrary, they had only obtained their current positions because of the influence of their ancestors. But because Ing Zong and Shi Heng had suffered consecutive defeats, the capital had become dangerous, and their positions had become extremely important. It was precisely because their positions were so important that the 5 of them began to think of ways to leave their current positions. Perhaps it was because they were cowards, or perhaps it was because they knew their own weight, but there was no way they could win in this kind of war. This forced them to find other methods. It was as if among the 4 of them, apart from Sun Tong, the other 4 had all found some connections. It was just that time was short, and this was a position that no one could avoid, so Tao Jin and the others had not been able to find a suitable replacement. The situation had already been thoroughly investigated by the Security Bureau, and Yang Qindong was naturally very clear about it. And this time he called the 5 of them over. To put it bluntly, he wanted to reorganize the internal affairs. He would definitely not allow unstable factors and situations to appear in the midst of a war. The 5 of them stood in front of Yang Qindong with apprehension. When they heard that they could sit down, the 5 of them cupped their fists and said respectfully, "Thank you, Marquis." Seeing that the 5 of them had found a place to sit down, Yang Qindong waved his hand and said to Tiger's Mane, who was waiting at the door, "Pass down the order. Don't serve the dishes yet, and there's no need for anyone to serve here. Everything will be discussed after Marquis has finished discussing matters." "Yes," Tiger's Mane replied, then closed the door of the private room and waited there. At the same time, his ears perked up to ensure that if anything happened in the room, he could immediately rush in to protect the young master's safety. The room was closed and there was no one else in the room. There wasn't even a cup of tea to quench their thirst. For a moment, the 5 of them felt waves of nervousness, and the more cowardly ones began to break out in cold sweat. Yang Qindong saw the 5 of them's expressions, and for the time it took to drink a cup of tea, he did not say a word. It was this overly quiet scene that caused the 5 commanders' mentality to undergo a huge change. They were not sure what their boss's temper was like. What would he do next? The room was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Just when the commanders were so nervous that they did not dare to wipe off the cold sweat on their heads, Yang Qindong, who was sitting at the head of the table, spoke. "The 5 of you Walla's army will invade the capital in a few days. Do you have the courage to fight?" "Yes." After being stunned for a moment, the five of them replied in unison. There were only five of them and their voices were not in unison. Some were loud, some were soft, some were strong and some were weak. This was a sign that they were lacking in confidence. Yang Qindong, who had seen everything, suddenly snorted, "Do you really have the courage? If I let you lead your troops out of the city to fight, how confident are you in winning?" When Tao Jin and the other three heard that Yang Qindong was sending them out of the city to fight, they were momentarily speechless. Sometimes it was one thing to boast, but it was another thing to actually do it. Take them for example. Usually they were full of vigor when dealing with disobedient commoners in the city. However, if they were to really fight against Walla, perhaps before they even reached the battlefield, they would be so scared that their legs would go soft. Tao Jin and the other three were a little hesitant, but Sun Tong directly stood up and said with an imposing voice, "We are paid by the imperial court. If there is a war, we will fight." You are not bad." After looking at Sun Tong for a while, Yang Qindong's face showed a trace of a smile. With Sun Tong taking the lead, the other four were not as confident, but at this time they could only express their stance one by one, saying that if there was an order, they would obey. Yang Qindong did not take Tao Jin and the other three's stance to heart. The sixth young Master Yang, who had personally been on the battlefield and completed countless missions, knew very well what kind of people could be used and what kind of people could not be used on the battlefield. There was a saying that one should not be afraid of a wolf-like opponent, but a pig-like teammate. Since he knew the temperament of Tao Jin and the other three, Yang Qindong naturally knew what to do next. "Good, Marquis has seen everyone's performance. Next, we will make appropriate work arrangements according to each of your conditions. When the time comes, you only need to obey the military orders. Come serve the dishes." After understanding the situation, which was very similar to what the Security Bureau understood, Yang Qindong had a basic understanding of the five people in his heart. Chapter 182. The dishes were finally ready to be served, and the atmosphere was no longer oppressive. On the contrary, because the dishes were all very expensive, and some of them were even dishes that the five of them had heard about but could not afford due to their lack of money, everyone began to wolf down the food. Once the wine was served, the five of them began to toast Yang Qindong to express their respect as subordinates. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yang Qindong divided everyone's work while drinking with the five of them. Based on what he had said, other than Sun Tong, who was working with him against Walla's army, the other four commanders would each take 200 men to maintain order in the capital. Even though the warden's office had transferred many soldiers from the 5 cities to the battlefield in the last 2 wars, each commander originally had more than 1,000 men under their command. Now that only 200 men had been left behind, their authority had been greatly reduced, but none of the 4 complained. This was because they did not need to go to the battlefield to face a battle of life and death. As long as they could stay alive, it didn't matter how many soldiers they led. After figuring out the thoughts of the 5 men, Yang Qindong took away their military power after a meal, and transferred 4,200 warriors from the warden's office of the 5 cities to serve him. How could Tao Jin and the other 3 not see that Yang Qindong was seizing military authority? But none of them expressed any objection. This was their so-called tacit understanding. As long as they could stay alive, they didn't care if their authority was reduced or not. After obtaining the military authority of the 5 cities' warden's office, Yang Qindong had accomplished his first task. After sending off the 5 of them, his second order was to open the gates and allow the common people to freely choose whether to leave or stay. Originally, when the main gate had been closed, only the side gates had been opened, and a strict inspection had been carried out. But now the policies at the city gates had undergone a massive change. The commoners could enter and leave the city at any time. Everyone quickly spread the news. In just one day, more than 400 households had left the city. 2,000 to 3,000 of them were commoners. Because of this matter, the eunuchs in the palace received orders from Jianghu to inquire about it. The answer they received was that all of this was done by the Duke of Loyalty. The reason was that if the situation in the city was unstable, once they faced the Walla's army head-on, wouldn't they fall short of success? In order to ensure the absolute safety of the capital, any unstable factors had to be dealt with in advance. When this news reached the palace, first into the ears of Jianghu, then into the ears of Emperor Zhu, this matter was quickly ignored. Using Zhu Qiu's words, one should never doubt the people one used. Since he allowed Yang Qindong to take control of the military, he could do whatever he wanted. He would support him unconditionally. Some of the officials in court disagreed with Yang Qindong's decision to allow the people and merchants to leave the capital. In their view, how could the people leave the city at any time? If this situation continued to spread and the capital became an empty city, how could the Walla's army defend the city when it attacked? Wouldn't they just be waiting for death? Wasn't letting the people leave the city the same as digging one's own grave? Most people had similar thoughts. Soon, memorials to impeach Yang Qindong were spread all over Zhu Qiu's desk. Regretfully, at this crucial moment, Emperor Daizong didn't even glance at these memorials, expressing his complete trust in Yang Qindong. He had not received any imperial edict to stop him. On the second day, even more people left the city. In just half a day, more than 5,000 people had left the city. Most of them were merchants who had business in the capital. Merchants valued profit over justice. In their view, it didn't matter who ruled over them. What was important was who could bring them benefits. With this traditional mindset, it was no wonder that they would choose to leave the city when a calamity was about to befall the capital. Before leaving the city, most of the people sold some of their properties and goods to Hu Yan and the other girls at a very low price. For a time, the girls were very busy, and Yang Qindong's business began to blossom all over the capital. In just 3 days, more than a quarter of the merchants in the capital had left. The Yang clan had also spent the 5 million taels of silver that they had prepared. Even Jining had spent 2 million taels of the 5 million taels that the emperor had allocated to him. With 7 million taels of silver and the cheap properties of the imperial household that Yang Qindong had obtained from the Bureau of Revenue, 1% of the capital's businesses now belonged to Yang Qindong alone. In just 3 days, the Yang clan's businesses had more than doubled in size. In particular, almost 90% of the businesses on the street between the sky beyond heaven and the immortal abode were now under Yang Qindong's ownership. Even the location of the Yang clan's bank had been decided and renovated according to the loyalty marquis's plan. Many people had taken note of Yang Qindong's actions. But they did nothing to stop him. On the contrary, they watched as things unfolded as if they were watching a show. Emperor Zhu Qiu, in particular, was watching all of this from the perspective of a spectator. On the first day that Yang Qindong had made his move, Zhu Qiu had received a report from Jining. But he was not alarmed. He was happy because the more Yang Qindong invested in the capital, the more confident he was in the defense of the capital. The more money he invested now, the greater his harvest would be in the future. It was precisely because there was no one to stop them that all the plans went smoothly. On the morning of the 4th day, a group of 500 embroidered uniform guards wearing flying fish robes appeared outside the immortal abode. Over the past few days, the immortal abode had become Yang Qindong's resting place. After all, now that he had taken command of the army, he could not return to the Yang clan manor like before. If something happened, wouldn't that delay his plans? It was precisely because Yang Qindong was staying in the immortal abode that the appearance of the 500 embroidered uniform guards caused Tiger's Mane, who was responsible for the young master's safety, to become extremely nervous. He hurriedly sent a message to the nearby company commander Xiao Feng, asking him to hurry over as quickly as possible. At the same time, he also instructed Qiu V's first squad of guards and Dao Xiao's second squad on the street across the street to prepare for any sudden changes. After making all the necessary preparations, Tiger's Mane went to see Yang Qindong. Yang Qindong had slept rather late last night after fighting with the 4 women. When Tiger's Mane arrived, he had just finished washing up and was about to eat breakfast. When he saw Tiger's Mane enter the room with a nervous expression, he couldn't help but smile. "What is it? Has the Walla's vanguard arrived?" "Not yet. The people from the Security Bureau have reported that their vanguard is still 200 li away from the capital. They'll probably arrive by nightfall." Tiger's Mane relayed the report to Yang Qindong. When he saw the young master looking at the report from the Security Bureau, he cautiously took half a step forward. "Young master, 500 embroidered uniform guards have arrived. They're currently guarding the entrance. However, I've already sent someone to call Company Commander Xiao Feng over. We definitely won't let them threaten the safety of this place. The embroidered uniform guards are here." After listening to Tiger's Mane's report, Yang Qindong's face didn't show the slightest bit of surprise. Instead he said, "This Jining is quite calm. Forget it, bring their leader in to see Marquis." Tiger's Mane originally thought that when the young master learned that so many embroidered uniform guards had arrived at the entrance, even if he wasn't nervous, he would at least show a certain amount of surprise. He never thought that he would still be so relaxed. Could it be that all of this was within the young master's plan? It must be. In Tiger's Mane's eyes, Yang Qindong was already a godlike existence. In his eyes, whatever the young master said was the truth, and whatever the young master did was the most correct. With this understanding, the originally nervous tiger's mane relaxed quite a bit. He nodded and turned to leave. Just as Yang Qindong had predicted, the embroidered uniform guards weren't here to cause trouble. They were here on orders from the head eunuch, Jining, to collect the silver. They'd previously agreed that Jining would receive 1 million silver out of the 5 million taels of silver. She'd also requested that the embroidered uniform guards commander Lu Gui personally come to collect the silver. This morning, Lu Gui had come to complete this mission. As for the reason he'd put on such a grand display, it was naturally to give Yang Qindong a show of strength and intimidate him. He wanted to let this marquis know that the consequences of provoking the embroidered uniform guards were not to sleep well or eat well. Outside the immortal abode, the commander of the embroidered uniform guards, Lu Gui, and Commander Han Ji, were leisurely chatting. "Sir, don't you think the loyalty marquis was scared witless after seeing such a scene? I saw the immortal abode's gates shut after we arrived," Han Ji said to Shangguan Lv Gui in a flattering manner, as if he were a petty person intoxicated with success. He's just a scholar. How brave can he be? Actually, we're doing this for his own good. We're teaching him a lesson before the Walla's army arrives. We'll let him know what it means to be imposing, what it means to be afraid, and what it means to be timid." Ah! Lu Gui couldn't help but throw his head back and roar with laughter. Crick! The immortal abode's gates opened, and the tall tiger's mane walked out. He strode in front of Lv Gui and Han Ji, then spoke to them in a condescending manner. "The marquis invites you in. Doesn't he have legs? Why doesn't he personally come out to greet our commander?" Seeing that the immortal abode had finally received the brunt of the attack, Han Ji wanted to use his aura to suppress the other party. However, as soon as the words left his mouth, before he could even reveal the slightest hint of a smile, he felt his vision go black. Then he felt a sharp pain in his eye socket. Han Ji stumbled back 3 steps. Chapter 183. A straight punch gave him a black eye. As far as Tiger's mane was concerned, anyone who was disrespectful to the young master deserved to be beaten, regardless of their identity or who they were. Tiger's mane gave Han Ji a punch in public, but it shocked Lv Gui, who was watching the show from the side. Although his subordinate's words were a little arrogant, how could he casually make a move when he had something to say? It seemed that it was the privilege of the brocade gown guards to fight without saying a word. When was it the turn of others to treat them like this? "Brat, you're courting death." Feeling that this punch was aimed at the brocade gown guard's face, and after feeling that this punch had provoked his dignity, an angry roar came out of Lv Gui's mouth. As soon as his voice fell, the 2 trusted subordinates pulled out the embroidered spring sabers from their waists. The reaction of the 2 was not slow. To be able to become the trusted subordinates of the commander among the brocade gown guards, if they did not have some skills, how could they be competent? It was just that they were fast, but some people's reactions were faster than theirs. Just as the sabers were pulled out of the scabbard, 2 muffled sounds came, hitting the embroidered spring sabers that were pulled out. At this time, they saw that the scimitar had already fallen out of their hands and landed on the ground. The 2 trusted subordinates were frightened by this sudden change. They instinctively raised their heads to look, but there was nothing unusual in their eyes. What's going on? Under the silencer, when the gunshots were fired, outsiders did not hear it. Lv Gui, who was not far away, did not see anything wrong. All he saw was the action of the 2 trusted subordinates pulling out and throwing the sabers, so he asked angrily. At this moment they could not even hold the sabers. It was really a loss of face for the brocade gown guards. Being angrily reprimanded by their superior, the 2 trusted subordinates did not dare to argue. They instinctively bent down to pick up the sabers, but just as they took a step forward, 2 muffled sounds came out, hitting in front of the 2 men's feet, raising a cloud of dust. It could be foreseen that if the 2 of them had taken a bigger step just now, the shot would have hit their feet. If that was the case, it would be hard to say if they would still be standing here in one piece. If the first shot did not make them understand what was going on, then the second shot completely broke their psychological defense, letting them know that they were just flesh and blood, and that they were so close to death. In an instant, the 2 of them who had been taught a lesson didn't dare to move. They maintained their posture, half-bent and motionless. The first time he shouted, Lv Gui didn't notice anything unusual. But just now he had seen 2 clouds of dust fly up with his own eyes. After associating it with the results of the brocade guard's investigation, If he still didn't know what had happened, then his position as commander really wouldn't be given to such a fool. He knew that it must be the effect of the new firearms. At this moment, cold sweat kept breaking out on his forehead. In his heart he kept asking, what kind of firearm is this? Why is it so accurate, and when it was shot, it didn't make any sound? Then, if this thing wanted to deal with him, wouldn't he have lost his life here? LV Gue was also frightened. Even when his subordinate maintained a somewhat ridiculous posture, he didn't reprimand him. On the other hand, Han Ji, who had been beaten, didn't see any of this and naturally didn't know what had happened. Seeing that he had been beaten and his superior didn't care, he angrily roared, "What are you all standing there for? Capture this person. He dares to provoke the brocade guard, he deserves to die. Yes, let's go together." After the other brocade guard heard Han Ji's order, they all shouted and pulled out their long swords intending to attack. On the other hand, LV Gue saw the faint smile on the tiger's mane's face from the corner of his eye, and his heart trembled. "All of you stop. Put your swords away, put them away." After what had just happened, he was very clear that if he chose to make a move right now, he and the other brocade guard would be the first to fall. Therefore, he hurriedly shouted and strode over to the black-eyed Han Ji. He swung his hand and gave him a slap. Slap. This slap was extremely solid. After the slap, LV Gue loudly reprimanded, "What are you shouting for? With me here, you don't have the right to speak." How could Han Ji know that LV Gue had only slapped him because he was on his side? The slap was painful and a bloody handprint was left on his face. However, what hurt even more was the confusion and grievance in his heart. After the slap, LV Gue didn't pay him any more attention. Instead, he walked over to the tiger's mane's side. At this moment he was like a completely different person. With a smile on his face he said, "I'll have to trouble you to lead the way. Follow me." Seeing that his display of strength was effective, the tiger's mane didn't waste any more words with LV Gue. He nodded lightly, then turned around and walked into the interior of the immortal abode. LV Gue left, leaving behind Han Ji and the several hundred brocade guards standing there looking at each other. They didn't understand. Wasn't he here to show off his strength to the loyal Marquis? How did it end up like this? How did he become someone who didn't fight back when he was hit or cursed? LV Gue entered the immortal abode and went up to the second floor, arriving at the private room where Yang Qindong had received him. As soon as he entered, the first thing he saw was Yang Qindong's back, clad in green robes. Even though he knew that LV Gue had walked in, Yang Qindong still didn't turn around. Instead he said, "Commander, you really are stupid." Chem? LV Gue, who'd been reprimanded as soon as he entered the room, was first confused, then angry. No matter what, he was still the commander of the brocade guard. He had great authority, and he had the authority to arrest court officials and even dukes and marquises. He could execute them first and report later. So why was it that he'd been given the cold shoulder here? Then he'd been warned in secret. Now that he'd finally met the person in question, he hadn't even seen his true face? Why was he being reprimanded? With his status, even Jining had to treat him with a smile when assigning him a mission. Who did this Yang Qindong think he was? He was just a young man who hadn't even grown out his hair yet. Although he had military authority, his position in the brocade guard was still below his own. How dare he speak to him like this? With a face full of anger, he was just about to express his stance and even reprimand Yang Qindong when the Marquis of Loyal Courage, whose back was to him, spoke again. "Since you've come to take eunuch Jin's silver with your status, you should know that this matter is confidential. Yet you still brought so many people here with great fanfare. Do you want everyone in the world, including the Emperor, to know about this matter?" With this question, LV Gue, who'd been about to retort, immediately shut his mouth. He suddenly remembered that he'd come today to take the silver, but he seemed to have come to show off. Had things been ruined? Seeing LV Gue's face turn red and green, Yang Qindong laughed coldly in his heart. He laughed at the other's ignorance of the immensity of heaven and earth. He laughed at the other's selfishness over the public good. This kind of person was the existence he despised the most in his heart. A person could have a temper and personality, but everything had to be under the condition that it didn't affect the general situation. If one's personality ruined things, then that was unforgivable. LV Gue had made this mistake. Yang Qindong naturally had to seize this opportunity to properly educate the other party. Coming here with great fanfare to ask for money, those who don't know might think that the embroidered uniform guards are openly asking for bribes. Once this matter spreads, what will those imperial censors and ministers who hate you to the bone do? Is there even a need for Marquis to say anything? Yang Qindong's voice was cold as he stared at LV Gue with a confused expression. This official was too rash. LV Gue's face was pale and cold sweat poured down his forehead. If things really were as Yang Qindong said, that he'd brought 500 embroidered uniform guards with him and left with 1,000,000 taels of silver from the immortal abode, then the commotion it would cause might even cost him his head. As for the matter of him taking the silver for eunuch Jining, who would believe him if he told them? Not only that, eunuch Jining would probably be the first to make a move on him. His head almost fell off his shoulders as he thought about it. The one who'd saved his life was Yang Qindong. LV Gue didn't blame Yang Qindong in the slightest. On the contrary, he felt some gratitude. You really were too rash. When encountering a problem, you have to think carefully about how to deal with it. You have to plan carefully before you act. Alright, you can go now. I'll arrange for people to send the silver out of the immortal abode in batches. You can arrange for reliable people to wait outside to receive it. Yang Qindong naturally understood the principle of overdoing it, so he waved his hand and made a gesture that said, "You can leave now." Yang Qindong's words had already left LV Gue ashamed. He didn't want to stay here any longer. When he saw Yang Qindong's gesture, he hurriedly nodded and thanked him, then left the immortal abode. Outside the gates, Han Ji and the other embroidered uniform guards were still clamoring. When they saw that LV Gue hadn't come out even after going in for a while, they were even more worried about the commander's safety. They wanted to enter the immortal abode to investigate. Yang Si and Yang Wu, who were in charge of guarding the gates, obviously wouldn't agree to Han Ji's request. They stood in front of the immortal abode with Qiu Vi and the others, blocking everyone's path. Oh! When he saw that someone still dared to block the embroidered uniform guard's path, Han Ji was inwardly delighted. However, he pretended to be angry and turned to the embroidered uniform guards behind him. Brothers, do you see this? There's someone who doesn't give the embroidered uniform guard's face and dares to block our path. Tell me, what should we do? Charge in. Arrest anyone who dares block our path and throw them into the imperial prison. The embroidered uniform guards behind him were all roused by Han Ji's words. They all glared at him, unwilling to back down. Chapter 184. Several hundred people were shouting at the entrance of the immortal abode. This scene had long since attracted the attention of many commoners. It was as if they were looking at animals in a zoo. Every one of them had expressions of schadenfreude on their faces. To the commoners, both the embroidered uniform guard and the immortal abode were representatives of privilege. They were both lofty existences. To be able to see them fighting amongst themselves was like a dog-eat-dog situation. The commoners were happy to see it happen. More and more commoners gathered to watch. Gradually, even the servants and spies of the ministers began to appear in the crowd. They all wanted to figure out what was going on. Just as more and more people gathered to watch the commotion, LV Gue walked out of the immortal abode's entrance. When he saw so many commoners gathered around, his heart tightened. The loyal Marquis had been right. Things had already gotten to this point. If they were to take away such a large sum of gold and silver, it was easy to imagine what kind of impact that would have. If it weren't for Yang Qindong's warning, he would have made a grave mistake. He might even lose his head. And all of this was because he had trusted his subordinate Han Ji's words. He'd said he was giving Yang Qindong a show of strength, but in reality, wasn't he also putting his own head on the line? Everyone had this kind of mentality. When something happened, they were always willing to push the blame onto others. It was as if this was the only way to make them seem more intelligent. LV Gue had pushed all the blame onto Han Ji. When he saw how Han Ji was still jumping around as if he wasn't afraid of making a big fuss, LV Gue couldn't help but feel angry. He quickly stepped forward and slapped Han Ji's face. Paw! A loud slap fell, causing the originally bustling street to quiet down. Bastard, who told you that Wallace spies had infiltrated the immortal abode? This official went in to investigate, but there was nothing. As the head of the embroidered uniform guard, you actually believed a subordinate's report so easily. You didn't even investigate properly before taking action. Even this official was used by you. This is truly infuriating. From today onwards, Han Ji will be demoted to Jianghu of the embroidered uniform guard. Not only was Lu Gue slapped, but he was also scolded. Even Lu Gue's rank was demoted by more than one rank. Only then did Lu Gue feel much better. He looked around with a sinister gaze and said to the commoners who were watching the show, "What's there to see? Disperse." The dignified commander of the embroidered uniform guard had spoken. Who would dare to stay here? Everyone immediately scattered in all directions, restoring peace and tranquility. LV Gue immediately left with his people. Han Ji, who was stunned by the 2 slaps, was also dragged away by several of his trusted subordinates. By the window of a private room on the 2nd floor of the immortal abode, Yang Qindong had seen everything that had happened. His gaze was as sharp as a sword. Young master, now that Han Ji has been demoted, I'm afraid that his hatred for you will grow even greater. In order to avoid any future troubles, why don't? Tiger Mane, who was standing behind him, sensed the faint killing intent coming from Yang Qindong's body and took a small step forward. Yang Qindong didn't refuse. He simply nodded. Tiger Mane immediately understood. He also looked down at Han Ji's departing figure. This person is dead for sure. Yang Qindong had taken over all the military forces and defenses in the capital. The first thing he did was open the city gates, allowing the commoners who wanted to leave to leave. The already panicked merchants and commoners now had a chance to leave. In a flash, the population of the capital plummeted, and many industries were emptied. Using this chance, Yang Qindong decisively made his move. With Yang Qindong, Hu Yen, Xiaoyin, Madame Snow, and Madame Xiang working together, more and more industries and properties fell under Yang Qindong's control. In the immortal abode, the deputy chief of the Bureau of Security and the actual leader of Yang Xie's intelligence department, Yang San, was currently reporting all the information he had gathered to Yang Qindong. Young master, everything is as you imagined. The city gates are open, but the majority of those leaving are still merchants. The commoners only make up 2 or 3 out of 10. It seems that the commoners still have confidence in the imperial court. In addition, according to your previous orders, we've investigated and found that there truly are some merchants in the city who are profiting from the country's calamity. These people are mainly grain and salt merchants. They are wantonly raising the prices of grain and salt, throwing the normal order of the capital into disarray. We've recorded all the names of these people. It's all on this list. As Yang San spoke, he respectfully handed a list of names to his superior, Tiger's Mane, and then transferred it to Yang Qindong. Casually glancing at the list, he saw that there were 50 to 60 names. Yang Qindong lightly shook his head. These merchants have no sovereign or country, and only have profit in their eyes. They should be arrested. How about this? Immediately report this to Eunuch Jining and have him report this to His Majesty. After that, mobilize the embroidered uniform guard and the Eastern Depot to arrest these merchants for the crime of colluding with the enemy. Yang Qindong's voice was firm and decisive. There was nothing wrong with merchants seeking wealth, but if they wanted to profit from war and the country's calamity, then these merchants needed to be properly punished. Presumably, arresting these people would serve as a warning to the enemy. With this sort of example, the other merchants would have to think twice before doing anything out of line. As for how these merchants would be dealt with after being arrested, the embroidered uniform guard would probably know what to do. At most, they would be using money to buy their lives. As for those merchants who only cared about wealth and not the country, but killing a few of them as an example wasn't out of the question. After dealing with these merchants, Yang San continued to report. Young Master, Commander Lung Song has brought 3 companies of Lung Feng to the outskirts of the capital. They only need your order to enter the city. He's asking for Young Master's instructions on when and how to enter the city. In Yang Xie's new army, there were currently 20 companies and 5 battalions in the army, and 20 companies and 5 battalions in the navy. However, Yang Qindong didn't integrate these armies, and they were still divided into battalions. But even so, 2 commanders were appointed, and they were Lung Song of the army and Gao Xiong of the navy. This time, after learning that the young master was going to fight with Tile in the capital, they had to properly deal with the other party's spirit. In Crimson City, the battalion commanders of the Yang faction's new army were all busy fighting for this opportunity to perform well in front of the 6th young master. With the various battalion commanders fighting over this opportunity, Gao Xiong and Lung Song couldn't come to a decision. In the end, Lung Song, as the commander, brought 3 companies of soldiers over. After all, this battle was under the command of the 6th young master, and to be able to learn from the 6th young master was Lung Song's wish. As the only commander of the army and the highest-ranking officer other than Yang Qindong, if he were to personally lead the soldiers, the other battalion commanders naturally lost their chance. Since they couldn't become the commander, the other battalion commanders set their sights on the position of company commander. For a moment, the battalion commanders were willing to lower themselves by a rank and come to the capital as company commanders, listening to the orders of the 6th young master. For this matter, Lung Song and Gao Xiong had a headache for a long time. In the end, after some coordination, they came up with a result that satisfied all parties. Lung Song would be the commander of the 1st Battalion and the commander of the 2nd Company. Teng Shan, who was originally the commander of the 3rd Battalion, would be the commander of the 3rd Company. The commander of the 4th Battalion, Wu Sheng, would be the commander of the 4th Company. If one added on the 2nd Battalion commander, Xiao Feng, who had arrived in the capital early, then there would be 1 commander and 3 battalion commanders, forming 4 elite companies. At this time, Yang Qindong was holding a list in his hands. On it was a detailed list of the 300 men of the 3 companies. There were many names on this list that he could name. These were the first batch of cold front soldiers that he had personally trained, and 4th Battalion Commander Wu Sheng had also been trained by him. But when he graduated, there were too few officer positions, so he had been assigned the position of squad leader. He hadn't expected that after the training and outstanding performance in Crimson City, he would be promoted to battalion commander so quickly. Okay, arrange for them to enter the city in the afternoon. That's right, have them all wear camouflage uniforms and enter the city. Since they're called mercenaries, they naturally have to be different from other soldiers. Yang San will be in charge of this matter. Tiger's man will arrange for people to find a large courtyard in the city and have Lung Song and the others settle down there. Remember, without the permission of the young master, no one is allowed to approach that place. If any embroidered uniform guard or Eastern faction guard spies want to understand the situation, see some blood, but it's best if they don't kill anyone. The cold front had been single-handedly established by Yang Qindong, and he had spent a great deal of effort on it. Now that he finally had a chance to shine his sword, he naturally couldn't be careless. As the orders were passed down, the capital began to bustle with activity. Many embroidered uniform guards wearing flying fish robes suddenly appeared outside the shops that were operating. Upon their appearance, they immediately took away the shopkeepers and sealed up the shops. Their appearance was so sudden that many of the shopkeepers had cold chains around their necks before they could even understand what was going on. For a moment, one could see embroidered uniform guards on the streets, as well as the fat shopkeepers in cotton robes who had been captured by them. The sealing of shops and the capture of shopkeepers had caused wave after wave of unrest. This was especially the case since the majority of the shops that had been sealed were those that sold rice and salt. These were the most basic necessities of the common people, and this made them even more anxious. Chaos could erupt at any moment. Right at this moment, the sound of firecrackers could be heard from the streets. When the curious citizens came over, they realized that some new grain shops and salt shops had opened for business. The excellent location, the spacious and bright business environment, and the sight of mountains of rice and grains, as well as the unified Yang signboard, instantly calmed the anxious hearts of the citizens. Chapter 185. This was especially so when they heard that the prices of rice and salt were still the same as 10 days ago. There was no sign that the prices would increase because of the impending war. This made the common folk beam with joy and rush forward to buy. This also played a very positive role in stabilizing the morale of the people in the capital. Near the Miaoying Temple, also known as the White Tower Temple, in the inner city, in a shop that occupied an area of 500 square meters, a girl dressed in a pink suit was smiling as she looked at the people coming and going in the shop. She watched as the customers came and left happily. This woman was Yang Qindong's wife, Hu Yan. Dressed in a pink suit, she looked extremely capable and experienced. At this moment, she was supervising everything that happened in the shop as the lady boss, as well as all the transactions. The Miaoying Temple was near the Hu estate. Hu Yan had chosen this place to exercise her sovereignty so that she could better see the smiles on the faces of her former neighbors. Reality did not disappoint her. The cheap and high-quality food indeed made the faces of the commoners who entered here brimming with satisfied smiles. First, Madam, Marquis has ordered for you to hurry to the Yongding Gate. There's a show to watch. Just as she was sitting on a chair, sipping tea and looking at everything in front of her with satisfaction, Sun Chuang came to Hu Yan's side and reported in a low voice after exchanging a few words with Lung Feng, who was delivering the news. There's a show to watch? Prepare the sedan. Hu Yan originally wanted to stay a little longer and see if she could meet some acquaintances. However, when she heard that there was going to be a show to watch, how could she calm down? She immediately got up in a hurry, causing her maidservant, Xiaoqing, to grumble, "Miss, slow down. Walk slower." The same scene happened to Qiao Yin, Madame Shui, and Madame Xiang, who were patrolling the various shops in the city. They had all received news that there was a show to watch at the Yongding Gate, and that their husband was waiting for them there. Thus they all came in their sedan. On the tower of the Yongding Gate, Yang Qindong, dressed in green, was standing there. Beside him were Tao Jin, Sun Chuang, and the other commanders of the warden's office. The five of them stood there and looked into the distance. Unfortunately, their eyesight was limited and what they could see was very limited. Seeing nothing, the five of them looked at each other and then shook their heads. They really didn't know why the loyal Marquis had called them here. Compared to what the five of them were looking at with their eyes, Yang Qindong was holding a pair of military binoculars in his hand. From time to time he would raise the binoculars and look into the distance. Then a faint smile would appear in his eyes. Tap tap tap. The sound of high heels stepping on the ground could be heard from the stairs leading to the city tower. It was crisp and pleasant to the ears. Hearing the voice, Yang Qindong didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Apart from his four wives, there was no one else in the world who would wear something as avant-garde as high-heeled leather shoes. Sure enough, Hu Yen took the lead, followed by Qiao Yin, followed by Madame Shui and Madame Xiang. The four women wore different women's suits of different colors and arrived at the top of the tower of the Yongding Gate. As soon as the four women appeared, it was really like 100 flowers blooming, giving a great visual impact to the men. The delicate women's suits made the four women's originally plump figures look more explosive. Under the knee-length miniskirts were white skin and slender and healthy legs, which made the men's hearts beat faster. With the contrast of the high heels, it made their figures look even more tall and beautiful. As soon as the four women appeared, they attracted everyone's attention. Tiger's Mane, who was standing aside, noticed that Sun Per and the other four people's eyes were fixed on Hu Yen and the other three women. He immediately coughed a few times. These coughs also reminded Sun Per and the other four people and instantly pulled their thoughts back to reality. Only then did they realize that it was really indecent to stare at the wives of the loyal Marquis with such eyes. Immediately, they blushed and turned their heads away. Lulang. Hu Yen and the other women simply ignored the gazes of others looking at them. Although their hearts were beating very fast at this time, they had gradually become accustomed to the feeling of being stared at and were able to quickly calm their emotions. The four women happily came to Yang Qindong and surrounded him and then greeted him. Of course, the most common question of the women was to ask what was there to see here. Don't worry, they will be here soon. Come on, give each of the four wives a telescope. Yang Qindong looked at the four women and smiled. With a gentle wave of his hand, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei each held 2 binoculars and handed them to Hu Yen and the other 3 women. The 4 women were no stranger to binoculars. They had seen it when they were in Yang Village. They had also sighed at the magic of this thing and their husband's cleverness. At this time, after taking the binoculars in their hands, they looked in the direction Yang Qindong pointed. With this look, a touch of olive green appeared in the binoculars. From a distance it looked like a straight pine tree. The only difference was that this pine tree was moving forward slowly. What is that? How can it move? Madame Snow was like a child who had discovered a new world. She shouted and shouted, expressing her curiosity. Although Hu Yen and Lady Xiang did not say anything, they put down the binoculars and looked at Yang Qindong with expectant eyes, revealing the surprise in their hearts. Only Qiao Yin, who had been to Qian City and even witnessed Yang Qindong training Lung Feng, looked at the 6th young master with a kind of gentle sunshine. She knew very well that these moving pine trees must be the trained elite force, Lung Feng, and their appearance must have been ordered by Lu Lang. What is it? What can move? At this time, Sun Tong and the other 4 looked at the girls with puzzled and confused eyes, and finally fixed their eyes on Yang Qindong. Seeing everyone's confusion, Yang Qindong first took off the binoculars hanging on his body and then handed it to Tiger's Mane, who was standing beside him. He did not say anything, but this servant, who had been following him since childhood, understood the young master's meaning. He took the binoculars and handed it to the puzzled Sun Tong. With curiosity and even more confusion, Sun Tong took the nightmare domain and then followed Yang Qindong and the girls, put the binoculars in front of his eyes. After looking at it, he could not help but scream. Perhaps the thing in front of him was too shocking, causing Sun Tong to put down his hands in surprise. Fortunately, the binoculars' long rope was hanging around his neck. Otherwise, such a valuable thing would have fallen to the ground after losing the binoculars. Sun Tong's shout made the other 4 commanders of the warden's office even more curious. They all surrounded him and asked what was going on. What exactly did he see that caused him to be so shocked and at a loss? Sun Tong did not know how to describe it or how to answer, so he decided to tell his colleagues the truth. He took off the binoculars and handed it to Tao Jin. Tao Jin also imitated Sun Tong and raised the binoculars in front of her eyes. Soon she also imitated Sun Tong and screamed. Her face was numb and she looked frightened. Ignoring the reactions of the commanders, Yang Qindong's eyes fell on Hu Yen and the girls and said with a smile, "This is the show that Lu Lang wanted you to see. And that is not something, it is an army, a mercenary army." Mercenary army? Hu Yen and the girls were confused. They had seen mercenaries before. Weren't the 100 Lung Feng led by Xiao Feng mercenaries? Moreover, these people were very polite to the girls, but it seemed that they were not the same. He nodded heavily. Lu Lang would not lie to you. It's just that the military uniforms of these mercenaries are different from the mercenaries you have seen before. Yang Qindong saw the doubts in the girls' eyes. Without waiting for them to ask, he took the initiative to answer. Yang Qindong's explanation made Hu Yen and the other girls nod their heads thoughtfully. While they were talking, this olive-green army of 300 people was rapidly approaching the Yongding city gate. The great Ming city guards who had received the order before, didn't stop the foreign army when they saw them approaching from afar. They just looked at this army that was completely different from theirs with vigilance. They wore light green camouflage uniforms and camouflage hats. They wore a pair of shiny black military high-waisted leather shoes, held a cold black Type 95 pistol in their hands, and carried a large backpack on their backs. There were blankets for them to sleep on, face boxes for them to wash their faces, toiletries and some necessities for their daily lives. The leader of the group was Lung Song, the army commander of the Yang faction's new army. He straightened his body and looked forward with bright eyes. His steps were vigorous and there was a sense of rhythm to them. Behind him, the 300 men were in a line of 4. There were a total of 75 Lung Feng soldiers marching forward in an orderly manner. Every 25 Lung Feng soldiers would be led by an officer. Unlike ordinary soldiers, they were all carrying exquisite black pistols. Under the protection of the holsters, the pistols were faintly discernible. When they could see the walls of the capital with their naked eyes, the 300 Lung Feng soldiers became highly nervous and excited. Not for anything else, but they would soon be able to see their absolute commander, the founder of this army, Yang Qindong. Everyone seemed very nervous. When the army was 100 meters away from the Yongding city gate, Lung Song, who was leading the army, had a solemn and dignified expression. "Second company, get ready. It's time to show our spirit. Everyone listen to my orders. Comrades, as close as brothers. Get ready to sing. Comrades, as close as brothers. I hope you can call us together. You come from the border, he comes from the interior. We are all children of the country." The neat and loud singing of the second company suddenly sounded. The first to be shocked were the great Ming soldiers guarding the city gate. Chapter 186. When they suddenly heard the neat and heroic singing, they were not shocked but frightened. Some of the more cowardly ones even threw the spears in their hands to the ground. The more courageous ones also raised their spears and tightly protected their bodies. It was as if they were on the battlefield and were ready to fight at any time. As the song rang out, Sun Per and the others on the city gate tower, who had been looking uneasy, were startled awake. They were still exclaiming about the magic and power of the telescope. What kind of existence was it to be able to zoom in so close to something so far away? While they were still puzzled and confused, they heard the earth-shattering singing. The 5 of them were startled and woke up from their doubts. The next thing he did was to look down at the 300 mercenaries dressed in strange clothes who were entering the city. "Third company, listen up. Soldiers who have been through tough times, get ready to sing." Ting Shan's shout suddenly rang out. "A firm company, a firm soldier, a firm mind red, a firm bullet with eyes, a firm bayonet stained red with blood, a charge like a gale, a firm iron wall, a firm company with many heroes, a firm soldier is all red." Immediately, a loud voice rang out, echoing the loud and clear singing of the second company in front of them. "Wow! The song is so shocking. Just listening to it makes one's blood boil. Who composed this song?" From a professional point of view, Lady Xiang and Lady Shui soon came up with a question. Then they looked at Lu Lang, who belonged to them, with deep meaning. During this period of contact with Yang Qindong, the 2 women had listened to many new songs. Over time they had become immune to these beautiful songs. At this moment, when they heard such a vigorous new military song, they naturally thought it was composed by Lu Lang. Yang Qindong did not give any answer to this. He just smiled and raised his right hand, greeting the 300 Lung Feng who were passing through the city gate. People who did not know saw this and thought it was just a warm greeting, but the Lung Feng marching under the city gate tower knew that this was the 6th young master welcoming them. These soldiers are so energetic. Yes, they march in unison. One look and you can tell that they are an elite army. As expected of a mercenary army. Just by looking at their momentum, the great Ming army can't compare to them. I just don't know how they trained. On the city gate tower, Sun Tong and the other commanders were sighing and envious. At the same time, they had a certain degree of confidence in defending the capital. Under the city gate tower, the company commander of the 4th Company, Wuxia, took the lead to sing the military song, "Unity is Strength." The entire army smoothly entered the city. Under the leadership of Xiao Feng and the other Lung Feng, they strode toward their own small courtyard in the city. Inform all the soldiers in the city not to disturb these mercenaries. Even spying on them. They have bad tempers. If they cause trouble, they will bear the consequences. Yang Qindong looked at the team going away in his eyes, then he ordered Sun Per and the other 4 people. Rest assured, Marquis. The soldiers of the warden's office will be very obedient. Sun Tong took a step forward and cautiously said, "However, we can't control the people from the Eastern faction and the embroidered uniform guard. If we can't control them, then don't. Just tell them the news. If anyone is blind enough to go up and lose their life, then it has nothing to do with us." Yang Qindong's lips curled up slightly as a strong sense of confidence spread through his body. Although the embroidered uniform guard and the Eastern faction were very powerful existences in the Great Ming dynasty, they were still nothing in front of the true Lung Feng. They were not qualified to be his opponents. The news of the 300 mercenaries entering the city quickly reached the palace and Emperor Zhu Qiu's ears. "They're all here? Are you sure it's 300 people?" Zhu Qiu asked with a trace of suspicion after hearing the news. It was no wonder that he cared so much about the number of people. Every person that appeared represented 20,000 taels of silver. Just thinking about it made one's heart ache. Even though they had exchanged some imperial properties for money, they had still taken out 5 million taels of silver. To the Great Ming dynasty, 5 million taels of silver was almost 2 years of tax revenue. How could Zhu Qiu's heart not ache? As the emperor's personal attendant, Jianghu naturally understood the logic behind this. When she heard the emperor ask about the number of mercenaries, she immediately replied, "Your Majesty, don't worry. We have checked the number of mercenaries one by one. 303. This is 3 more than the original request." "Then they won't ask us for more money, right?" Who would have thought that Dai Zong Zhu Qiu's first reaction would be to ask for more money? Jianghu was very helpless about this. She could only say in an uncertain tone, "That shouldn't be the case. After all, we've already given them a few million taels of silver. They shouldn't be short of 60,000 taels of silver. It's good that they won't ask for more money." Zhu Qiu nodded as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He had only become the emperor for a short while, but he had already experienced so many things. Only leaving and not entering, this seemed to be getting further and further away from his path of becoming a wise emperor. He had no choice but to be more careful. Jianghu stood at the side. She was still waiting for Zhu Qiu's instructions. Unexpectedly, there was no more movement from him. For a moment, she had so many things to say in her heart. She couldn't help but say carefully, "Your Majesty, they're here, but we don't know how strong they are. After all, there are only 300 people. Can they defeat the powerful Walla army with just them? This subject is worried about this." Right. After Jianghu's reminder, Zhu Qiu couldn't help but nod. After all, there were only 300 people. Even if they added the 100 from before, there were only 400 people. Could they really keep the Walla army out of the capital with just this? Even the Emperor Zhu Qiu had some doubts about this. "Beloved subject, in your opinion, what should we do?" This subject isn't sure. But there's nothing wrong with probing. It's just that the loyal Marquis has given strict orders that no one is allowed to disturb these mercenaries. He says that they have bad tempers and that if they rashly spy on them, someone might die. Thus, this subject doesn't know what to do, Jianghu said as she turned to look at Zhu Qiu. Jianghu truly didn't have much trust in these mercenaries, so she wanted to send someone to probe them. But she was also worried that this would infuriate Yang Qindong and cause him to be in an awkward position. Thus, she had decided to go with Zhu Qiu's decree. Although he hadn't been emperor for very long, Zhu Qiu had always been a smart man. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become Emperor Jing. After hearing Jianghu's words, how could he not know what she was thinking? There were some things that needed to be probed to find out. Otherwise, if he really did find a bunch of mediocre people, wouldn't it ruin his important task of guarding the capital? Thus, Zhu Qiu only needed to think for a moment before saying to Jining, "We also have this concern. Since that's the case, why don't we go and probe them? Presumably, even if something happens, we can say that we didn't know anything. Even the loyal Marquis can't do anything about it." Jining had been waiting for this exact sentence. She had been waiting for this imperial decree. Since even Zhu Qiu had said this, she naturally felt relieved and said, "Yes, this subject knows what to do." After obtaining the emperor's permission, Jining immediately summoned the commander of the embroidered uniform guard, Lu Gue, and gave him instructions on sending someone to probe the strength of the mercenaries. LV Gue had just taken back the 1,000,000 taels of silver and received a new order. When he heard that he was going against Yang Qindong again, he didn't know why, but there was a trace of fear in his heart. Previously, Lu Gue had only thought that Yang Qindong had been lucky enough to reach his current position at such a young age. However, after meeting him in the immortal abode that morning, the other party's aura, which was far beyond his age, made him feel uneasy. Yang Qindong had already said that the mercenaries had bad tempers and were not to be provoked. However, Jin Ying's arrival with an imperial decree put him in a difficult position. Should he send someone to probe? He was worried that he would anger Yang Qindong. The powerful aura that had oppressed him in the morning had yet to completely dissipate. Should he not go? This was the emperor's decree and also eunuch Jin's orders. Even if he had twice as much courage, he wouldn't dare disobey. I still have to go. But who should I send? Lu Gui's mind began to fill with names and figures. Soon Han Ji's name appeared in his mind. Han Ji had offended Yang Qindong. As Shangguan Lu Gui, he was well aware of this. Today he had been demoted because of a mistake and demoted to a Qianhu. If he were still Commander Qianshi, it wouldn't be appropriate for him to probe. However, a Qianhu wasn't an issue. Men, bring Qianhu Han here. I have something to discuss with him. Now that he had made up his mind, his tone was filled with confidence. Han Ji. From the moment he married his sister to Wang Go, he had already sworn an irreconcilable oath with Yang Qindong. From that moment on, he had already had one foot in the gates of hell. The reason he hadn't killed Han Ji before was because of his status. If a Commander Qianshi of the embroidered uniform guard, a dignified 4th-rank official, was suddenly killed, it would definitely cause a huge uproar. This wouldn't benefit Yang Qindong at all. It was better to keep him alive for now and wait for the right opportunity to make a move. However, this morning Han Ji had actually instigated Lu Gue to make trouble for the immortal abode. Just this alone made it clear that he couldn't be allowed to live. After Tiger's man received the order, he handed this mission to the captain of the Ghost Shadow Sniper Squad, Bai Zua. This kind of invisible killing was the Ghost Shadow Sniper Squad's specialty. After receiving the mission, Bai Zua began to look forward to the arrival of night. Chapter 187. Before the sky was completely dark, the people who were watching Han Ji sent back a message, saying that he had gone to the commander of the embroidered uniform guards, Lu Gue. In less than the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, he came out again, and then brought 10 embroidered uniform guards with him to an inconspicuous restaurant nearby to drink. Han Ji's abnormal behavior was quickly made suspicious by Bai Zua after he learned about it. He had just been demoted during the day, so he should be in a bad mood. How could he have the leisure to drink? Even if he was going to drink, he shouldn't have brought 10 skilled brothers with him. There was only one explanation for such behavior, and that was that he had received some kind of mission. Not knowing what Han Ji would do, Bai Zua simply ordered to keep an eye on him. At the same time, all the brothers had to maintain 100% vigilance. They just had to eat some dry food in their respective monitoring positions. If there was an accident because of anyone's carelessness, then they would be expelled from the Ghost Sniper team. With the strict order, the 20 members entered a state of battle preparation. Even when it was time to eat, the snipers and observers ate separately, keeping an eye on Han Ji. He was completely monitored, but Han Ji didn't realize it. He was still eating meat and drinking with his brothers in the restaurant. Brothers, the commander said that today's mission is extremely important. This Qianshi also took into account the good relationship between us, so I brought you out to pick up merits. So tonight we can drink, but no one is allowed to drink too much, understand? Han Ji said with a face full of pride. He even called himself Qianshi. In fact, this was LV Gui's promise to him. LV Gui said that tonight's mission was to test these new mercenaries and see what kind of level they had. If they were heavily guarded and had strong combat power, then they shouldn't provoke them. But if they were just donkey dung eggs on the surface, then they should teach them a lesson, which was equivalent to making a great contribution. When the time came, he would definitely report to the emperor. At that time, it would be easy to restore his identity as Qianshi. Once he entered the eyes of the new emperor, his future would be bright. It was even possible that he would be promoted and become a fellow embroidered uniform guard. Making such a heavy promise was just to make Han Ji do his best in his work. Regarding this, Han Ji was completely unaware. He only thought that the emperor was suspicious of these mercenaries. In his heart, he thought that as long as he could prove that these mercenaries were incompetent, he would be able to heavily damage Yang Qindong's reputation. At that time, he would definitely make this loyal marquis kneel at his feet and apologize. With such a thought, he was determined to succeed in tonight's operation. He had already thought it through. He would use the knockout incense to subdue these mercenaries. This was also the most common method used by the Imperial Secret Service. If they were caught off guard, no matter what kind of expert they were, they would eventually be knocked to the ground. At that time, wouldn't they be at his mercy? Han Ji described a beautiful future, and the 10 brothers all showed expressions of gratitude, thanking him. It was as if they had already made a great contribution. They drank for more than 4 hours until the sky was completely dark and the curfew bell had rung. Only then did Han Ji leave the tavern with his brothers and rush toward the courtyard where the mercenaries lived. This scene was clearly seen by the Phantom Sniper Squad. When they saw the direction this group of people was heading, Baizhou quickly understood the other party's intentions. He immediately sent someone to report the situation to the 6th young master. After all, the other party's target was Lung Song and the others. Whether they wanted to continue the assassination mission or not, they still needed to obtain Yang Qindong's approval. Under surveillance, Han Ji and his 10 trusted subordinates had already arrived at a street away from Lung Feng's courtyard. They stopped here and then each of them looked for a safe place to hide. As experts of the Imperial Secret Service, their hiding skills were naturally not bad. In addition to the cover of the night, if it wasn't for the fact that they were constantly watching them, it would be difficult for Baizhou and the others to discover them without the help of the night vision device. Han Ji's group of 11 hid and began to wait. They were waiting for the arrival of night, the moment when a person's body was at its most exhausted. They believed that these mercenaries who were constantly on the move would make a mistake even if they arranged for someone to be on night watch. That would be the best time for them to make their move. They didn't ask for too much. As long as they could kill 2 mercenaries, it would be enough to prove that their mission was a success, and that these people's strength was only SOSO. Immortal Abode. It was the largest bedroom in the rear courtyard. When it was built, it was originally reserved for Yang Qindong to rest in. Even though every inch of land here was worth its weight in gold, and even though the 6th young master didn't often come here to rest, the room had always been reserved. This was a sign of everyone's gratitude and respect for him. Since he had taken over the city's military, it was naturally inappropriate for him to rest in the Yang Manor. For the past few days, this place had become Yang Qindong's resting place. At night, Hu Yen and the other 3 girls would accompany him here. For the past few days they would chat and have a good time. In the room, Yang Qindong was telling stories to the 4 girls and making them happy. Suddenly he heard Tiger's Mane's voice from outside the door. "Young master, Baizhou has sent news." "Wait a minute." Yang Qindong shouted to the outside, then put on a robe. After giving the girls a look to wait for a moment, he walked out of the bedroom and saw Tiger's Mane and an observer from the Ghost Shadow Sniper team outside the door. As soon as the observer saw Yang Qindong come out, he half knelt on the ground and showed great respect. "6th young master, when our captain followed Han Ji, he found that he took 10 men and rushed to the courtyard where Commander Lung Song was resting. The captain asked for instructions on what to do next." "Oh? There's such a thing." Yang Qindong's eyes narrowed slightly after hearing this, then he quickly smiled and said, "If the King of Hell wants you to die at midnight, who dares to keep you alive until dawn? Since he wants to die so much, we'll fulfill his wish. Tell your captain not to alert the enemy. It's a good opportunity to see how vigilant Lung Song is. Also, no matter what the result is, there's no need to keep any of these people alive. Kill them all and hand them over to the Security Bureau. Let them send these bodies to the Genie Guard's office as a warning." Since he said before that the mercenaries had bad tempers, whoever provoked them would be unlucky, and if there were still people who wanted to try, then there was no need to be polite. It just so happened that Han Ji was also killed, so it saved him some trouble in cleaning up the aftermath. In the dark, the security bureau's people escorted the observer back to Baizua's place. After receiving the sixth young master's order, the Ghost Shadow Sniper team quietly stayed in the dark, as if they were one with the night. The cold wind blew, and the drums of the third night watch were beaten. The whole street was silent. A few black shadows covered each other on the street and began to move. The Genie Guard was an important military force that the emperors relied on. Was indeed good. At least, the way they moved forward alternately was very desirable. They always maintained an attacking formation and did not forget to defend. It had to be said that they spent a lot of effort in training. In just a few moments, the 8 figures disappeared into the depths of the street, giving people the feeling that they had never appeared. But in the dark corner, 2 groups of people were waiting for their arrival. Hanji was very careful not to make a move directly. Instead, he stopped there with 2 trusted aides. This way, if there was good news, he could be the first to know. Of course, if the situation was not good, he could also withdraw at the first moment. Perhaps this was the advantage of being an official. The danger was always left to the subordinates, and most of the credit would fall into his hands. Similarly, Baizhua and the other 21 people were waiting. The difference was that they had used this time to surround Hanji, who was hiding in the corner in a fan-shaped formation. That seemingly inconspicuous corner had long become the target of public criticism. This kind of fan-shaped circle could guarantee that once Hanji wanted to leave, no matter which direction he left in, he would at least be facing the muzzles of the 2 snipers. It was really difficult to escape even if he had wings. Hanji, who was unaware of this, was still waiting for the good news. He was very confident in his heart. Not to mention that the 8 men were very skilled, they were also equipped with strong bows and crossbows. Even in the dark, they could guarantee that they could kill the target within 70 steps. Having such strong bows was where Hanji's confidence came from. He closed his eyes and leaned against the corner, even showing a victorious smile on his face. He seemed to have seen the scene of success and the scene of him receiving the reward for the mission. In the courtyard across the street. This courtyard was originally the residence of a prince. Later, because it was sealed outside, it became empty and became the property of the imperial family. This time, when they were discussing with the Ministry of Revenue, Yang Qindong's cousin, Yang Fu, felt that the environment here was good. Most importantly, the territory was big enough, so he took over this courtyard and made it the temporary resting place of the Cold Front soldiers. According to the rules, when they entered the courtyard, Commander Lung Song ordered people to do a thorough search. Even though this was the place that the 6th young master had arranged for them, there was no harm in being careful. Yang Qindong often said that it was better to rely on oneself than on others. It was impossible for people not to make mistakes, but a cautious attitude could completely reduce the chances of making mistakes. After this lesson, no matter where the Cold Front soldiers were, no matter how tired they were, they never relaxed their search of the resting place. When they were attacking the central part of Ryukyu Island, they even found 2 hidden enemy soldiers near the resting place. They originally wanted to set fire to the place while the Cold Front soldiers were asleep, but in the end they were caught by the always cautious new army. Since then, every time they went to a place, a strict search of the surroundings became an iron rule. Chapter 188. After a round of inspection, they didn't find anything wrong. Only then did the army start to cook. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Lung Song, who had arranged enough guard work, called the 2 battalion commanders who were acting company commanders to his temporary room. The 3 of them met, and Lung Song had no intention of being polite. He bluntly said, "Gentlemen, the 6th young master has been setting up a trap in the capital, and it has been going very smoothly. This time we were able to come here and show off our skills is also part of the plan. Now that we have smoothly arrived in the capital, it is equivalent to taking the first step. However, the situation will only become more severe. Even before we fight with the Walla army, I'm afraid that the great Ming Empire's capital army will be probing us first." Ting Shan and Wu Xing both nodded in agreement after hearing Lung Song's words. It was clear that they had the same understanding. "Very good, I believe that you can also guess something. That's right, someone is looking down on us and I'm afraid that there will be a lot of probing. The 6th young master has already laid the groundwork for this matter. He has already made it clear to the outside world that as mercenaries, we don't have good tempers. In order to confirm this matter, the 6th young master didn't even come here to see us today." Lung Song continued, "The 6th young master has already used his actions to tell us everything. The next test will be at any time and how we perform is very important. Whether we can satisfy or disappoint the 6th young master, it is very likely that everything will happen tonight. Do you understand? Regiment Commander, we all understand. How about this? Please hand over the night duty to us, 3rd Company. I guarantee that we'll complete the mission. No matter who comes, we'll leave no one behind. If we can't complete the mission, I am willing to be punished according to military law. Ting Shan suddenly stood up, and then a resolute expression appeared on his face. Regiment Commander, please give the night duty to our 4th Company. If we can't eliminate all the enemies, I am willing to offer my head. 4th Company Commander Wu Sheng was even more resolute, directly putting his life on the line. Battalion Commander Wu, don't fight with me. In terms of qualifications, you are inferior to me. Ting Shan looked at Wu Sheng with a face full of anger. He was extremely dissatisfied that this person wanted to fight with him for the mission. Battalion Commander Ting, seniority is not enough to feed you. Everything depends on your methods. Our 4th Company is confident that we can complete this mission well. Wu Sheng's eyes were filled with sparks. He looked as if he would start a fight if he didn't agree with Ting Qingshan. The 2 battalion commanders showed that they wanted to fight for the mission, and this made Lung Song nodded with satisfaction. This was the military's morale. If everyone retreated in the face of trouble, then there would be no way to continue fighting this war. It was just that sometimes having confidence was a good thing, but in the end, strength was what determined the outcome of the matter. For example, Lung Song's strength was much stronger than the 2 of them. Whether it was his ability to lead troops, the quality of his soldiers, or the level of his official position, he was better than the 2 of them. That was why he snatched the mission the moment he opened his mouth. Alright, there's no need for you guys to fight over it. You're all tired from the day's journey. Let me take over tonight's duty. How can we do that? They objected almost at the same time. Just a moment ago, they were still arguing in full swing, and even seemed like they were going to fight if they didn't agree. Now they stood on the same line and objected to Lung Song. Why not? My position is the highest here. Lung Song said with an attitude of, I am the regiment commander, you have to listen to me. No. Ting Shan shook his head, showing an attitude of, even if you are the highest official, you can't have the final say. When it was Wu Sheng's turn, he said bluntly, if you want to talk about tiredness, everyone has been walking for the whole day. We are all tired. Why should we rest while your 2nd Company is responsible for the night duty? This is unfair to the brothers of the 2nd Company. I will not agree to this. If Regiment Commander insists on doing this, then tomorrow when I see the 6th young master, I will definitely complain. This is abusing power for personal gain, using force to oppress others. When Wu Sheng said this, Lung Song's eyes widened, but he didn't have the strength to do so. If it was in Crimson City, Lung Song would have done this, and Wu Sheng could only obey as a subordinate. But now, the 6th young master was right in front of them and they would see him tomorrow. It was no wonder that he dared to say this. This would indeed put a lot of pressure on Lung Song, and he didn't want someone to complain about him the moment he saw the 6th young master. That's right. If you don't give us a chance, I will also complain when I see the 6th young master tomorrow. Ting Shan saw that this seemed to be effective, and immediately followed suit. The 2 battalion commanders had the same attitude, and Lung Song knew that it was impossible to use his position to oppress others for the mission. He could only sigh and say, then let's draw lots. Tonight, the 3 of us will take turns to be on duty. As for whether or not there will be any accidents and who will encounter them, it will all depend on everyone's luck. That's good. Hearing that it was a draw, Ting Shan and Wu Sheng immediately felt that it was fair. Immediately, a smile appeared on their faces, completely different from their previous flushed faces. And if this scene was seen by Han Ji, he would definitely regret coming to test them. Who would have thought that in the face of danger, there would still be people fighting to go forward? With such morale, what kind of enemy couldn't be defeated and dealt with? After drawing lots, Lung Song's luck was very bad for the first half of the night. Ting Shan's luck wasn't very good either, drawing a lot near dawn. Only Wu Sheng, when he saw that the lot he drew was between the 3rd and 4th day, he was so happy that he couldn't close his mouth. Alright, some people don't need to be so happy. We just arrived today, maybe they will want to take a look before they try to test us. Ting Shan looked at Wu Sheng with some jealousy. On the other hand, Lung Song, as expected of a regiment commander, was very open-minded. Seeing that the results were out, he said with a serious face, no matter what happens, everyone must be careful when you are on duty. One of the sentries must be in the light while the other 2 are in the dark, forming a triangle to ensure that nothing goes wrong. Alright, you guys can go and prepare. While Lung Song let the 2 battalion commanders prepare, he also transferred 2 platoon leaders and 10 elite brothers from the 2nd company. Although he said that the lot was drawn early and that the enemy would rarely appear between the 1st and 2nd day of the night, Lung Song still made preparations to meet the enemy during the operation. Otherwise, he wouldn't have directly transferred 2 platoon leaders to be in charge of the sentries. But no matter how thorough the preparations were, seeing that the 2nd day of the night had passed and the 3rd day of the night had arrived, there was no abnormality in the outside world. Lung Song sighed, somewhat disappointed, and wanted to arrange for someone to inform Wu Sheng. Haha, no need to trouble the regiment commander, I'm already here. Unknowingly, Wu Sheng brought people and appeared behind Lung Song. Looking at the other party's camp, it was actually also led by 2 platoon leaders, and there were also quite a few squad leaders and vice-squad leaders. Looking at this camp, Lung Song knew that there was no need to remind the other party to be careful. When he left, he only patted the other party's shoulder, but at this moment, silence really spoke louder than words. Wu Sheng took over the defense and quickly started to set up according to the plan. Around the small courtyard, the 12 people he brought along split into 3 groups, with 2 in the dark and 1 in the light. He himself found a safe corner and stayed in the middle, constantly looking around with the night vision device in his hand. In his heart, he was still praying that if there were any enemies, they must appear when he was on duty. This was a good opportunity to show his face in front of the 6th young master. Perhaps their prayers had worked. Just a quarter of an hour after Wu Sheng and the others had hidden themselves, there was finally some movement on the wall of the courtyard. Although it was very slight, it was still discovered by the brothers who were in charge of guarding the courtyard. Speaking of which, this was all due to the camouflage training of the cold front line. Camouflage was created by Yang Qindong, and was improved based on his training when he was a soldier. The requirement was that any qualified cold front line must be able to stay in the same place for 24 hours without eating or drinking. This was the ability. To be able to stay in the same place for 24 hours was only a pass, 2 days was considered good, and 3 days was considered excellent. At first, many people did not understand this training, thinking that it did not require much skill, and the training was not meaningful. However, after a real test, after staying in the same place for 24 hours without moving, everyone realized how important this training was to train their mentality. It was precisely because of this training that the cold front members' violent tempers were much more restrained. This kind of training also allowed many of them to learn how to calm their hearts. This was to ensure that they would be able to face everything calmly under any kind of dangerous situation. The camouflage training also allowed every cold front line to have the potential to become an excellent sentry. It meant that at any time, anyone would be able to complete the task of being on guard. It was because of the inhuman training that the Imperial bodyguards did not discover the 8 hidden sentry. They only saw the 4 open sentry. It was the existence of the sentries that caused the 8 embroidered uniform guards to let down their guard. They carefully observed their surroundings, and after finding that there was nothing out of the ordinary, they began to slowly move towards the 4 sentries. The open sentry was located in the center of the courtyard, far beyond the distance of 70 steps. The Imperial bodyguards' bows could not reach the sentry, so if they wanted to get anything, they had to keep moving closer. However, they did not know that this method of approaching the sentry was bringing them closer to the Grim Reaper. The 8 Imperial bodyguards did have some skills. If it was not for the hidden sentry, it would not have been easy to discover them. However, even though they were discovered, Wu Sheng, who was hiding in the corner and watching everything with his night vision, did not immediately give the order to close the net. It was because he was not sure if the enemy had any reinforcements. This time he wanted to catch all of them in one fell swoop. If even one of them escaped, it would be considered a failure. Chapter 189. He carefully observed his surroundings, waiting to see if the other party still had any tricks up his sleeve. The 8 embroidered uniform guards had climbed over the high wall and were approaching the 4 sentries. Some of them had even taken out the strong bows on their backs, but Wu Sheng still did not see any backup. It should be these people. Even if they have backup plans, they won't be able to enter the courtyard. Wu Sheng quickly made a decision based on the situation. He then slowly stood up and moved his right hand to his mouth. Hand signals in the day and whistles at night. That was how the cold vanguards communicated with each other. Wu Sheng placed his right hand to his mouth and concentrated his qi into his dantian. He exhaled fiercely, and a sharp whistle was emitted from his mouth. It was especially bright and clear in the silent night. As soon as the whistle was emitted, 6 of the 8 sentries who had been waiting impatiently appeared in the darkness. The 95 style that they had been holding tightly in their hands spat out bright flames in the darkness. They fired directly at the embroidered uniform guards who had their backs facing them. Bah! 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 6 of the 8 embroidered uniform guards were knocked down by the first wave of attacks. The other 2 were also shocked by the sound. One of them stood there in a daze and was hit by the second wave of gunfire. The other reacted quickly and rolled on the ground, trying to find a safe place to hide. However, he was killed by a single shot just as he stood up. This shot was fired by Wuxia. Under the night vision goggles, any dodging was meaningless. Bah! 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 Footsteps were heard in the courtyard. One of the cold vanguards who was in charge of guarding the courtyard had rushed over to provide backup. Nothing was absolute. They would always have a backup plan. That was how the cold vanguards operated. As for the other cold vanguards, they were still sleeping in their rooms. Gunshots in the middle of the night had happened before. As long as the gunshots were not too intense, they had the right to not get out of bed. Search. See if there are any more enemies outside. Check if the enemies are completely dead. After Wu Xing killed an embroidered uniform guard with a single shot, he walked out of the darkness and commanded everyone with a smile on his face. Although this was nothing compared to Lung Feng's previous battles, it was equivalent to showing his face in front of the 6th young master. No matter how he looked at it, it was a joyous occasion. Some people were examining the body, while others had already jumped onto the wall to look outside. However, from the beginning to the end, there were still 2 hidden sentries who did not move at all. This was a precautionary measure. It had to be said that under Yang Qindong's training, the cold vanguard guards had already become elites. If the great Ming dynasty's imperial guards wanted to use strong bows to deal with them, not to mention 8 people, even if 80 or even 800 people came, they still wouldn't be able to gain the slightest advantage. Outside the courtyard, the sudden sound of gunfire startled Han Ji and the other 2. Their instinctive reaction was that something must have happened to the people they sent out. They must have been discovered. As for whether they succeeded or not, and whether they killed or injured their mercenary brothers, they would only know when they saw their brothers who escaped. Han Ji did not move. He was still waiting. Baizhou moved. The gunshot was the signal, and it was time for him to wrap things up. The whistle that signaled the attack was somewhat abrupt in the silent night. This also attracted the attention of Han Ji, who was hiding in a corner and waiting for news. What's that sound? He looked around vigilantly and asked his 2 subordinates who were hiding in the corner. It sounds like a whistle, but it's already the curfew. Who would blow such a thing on the streets in the middle of the night? One of the subordinates touched his head with a puzzled expression. HM? This is not good. Let's go. On the other hand, Han Ji was worthy of being the commander of the embroidered uniform guards. His reaction was not slow. Although he could not figure out what was wrong, his instincts told him that the situation was not right. The safest thing to do now was to retreat. As he spoke, he rushed out of the corner in a flash. The moment he rushed out, a fiery light flashed in the darkness, staring at the place he had just been hiding. It had been less than half a breath's worth of time, and it would have taken his life. Perhaps it was due to good luck or some other reason, but this shot did not take Han Ji's life. However, his 2 subordinates did not have such good luck. While they were still in a daze, their bodies fell to the ground. Their bodies violently rose and fell several times, and then there was no more movement. When he turned his head to look, he saw the scene of his 2 subordinates dying on the spot. Cold sweat poured down his forehead. At this moment, Han Ji was certain that he had been targeted, and if he was not mistaken, it was the work of mercenaries. After all, in the capital, there were very few people who dared to attack an embroidered uniform guard, and an official of the embroidered uniform guard on the streets. Don't kill me, don't kill me. I'm only passing by. I have no intention of making things difficult for you. Knowing the power of the new firearms, Han Ji did not dare to take any chances. He was afraid that in the next moment he would die on the spot like his subordinates, so he simply stopped hiding. He stood up and stood in the middle of the street and then loudly shouted. This shout was not only to express his submission, but also to attract the attention of the night watchmen in the capital. Although it was a curfew, the people of the 5 cities' warden's office still had the right to walk on the streets, patrol and protect the law and order. Bah! A crisp sound rang out as soon as Han Ji stood up, and then a piercing pain came from his leg. The strong pain made him half kneel on the ground with a plop, and the cold sweat on his face dripped like rain. The half-kneeling Han Ji did not understand. He had already surrendered, so why did these people still have no intention of letting him go? Did they really want to kill him? I am the commander of the Embroidered Uniform Guard, a fourth-rank official of the court. You can't kill me or else it will be very troublesome. Seeing that begging for mercy was not going to work, Hanji used intimidation. But no matter how he shouted, in the eyes of the ghost snipers, he was already a dead man. Daring to find trouble with the sixth young master was tantamount to being sentenced to death. No matter who pleaded for mercy, it was useless. Bah! Another sniper shot rang out. This time, it hit Hanji's left leg. Blood splattered, the bullet directly passed through the flesh of the thigh and quickly left. With a piercing wound, Hanji fell to his knees with a plop, unable to move an inch. No. Tears fell like rain. Hanji was so scared that he actually cried. If they had killed him directly, it might not have been so painful. However, this kind of torture was the best way to break a person's heart. Back then, there were many people who had been captured and tortured to death by him. Thinking about how they were unable to live or die, he even laughed out loud at that time. God made fools of people. Who would have thought that it would be his turn now? Bah! Another shot hit him in the left shoulder. His body could not help but tilt, almost falling to the ground. Kill me, kill me. This feeling of facing death at any time made Hanji's mind begin to collapse. At this time he no longer hoped to live, only to die quickly, which was also a kind of happy relief. However, the gunshots that should have sounded did not continue, and everything seemed to be quiet. There was only the faint sound of blood flowing out of the body. After half an hour, about a third of the blood in his body had flowed out. Without any emergency treatment, Hanji finally fell into a coma due to excessive blood loss. Then he slowly died. Of course, they did not directly kill Hanji because they did not want to let him off too easily. Feeling the feeling of death bit by bit was the result that Baizhua and the others wanted. The night wind blew, bringing with it the smell of blood, and then slowly dissipated into the air. The people living nearby only heard the crisp sound of firecrackers in the middle of the night, but no one knew what exactly happened, and no one had the courage to come out and take a look. It was not until the sky was completely bright that the people walked out of their houses. At this moment, the gate of the Embroidered Uniform Guard's office was very lively, and 11 corpses, including Hanji, were neatly lined up there. No one knew who sent these corpses, and the first people who found them were the soldiers of the warden's office patrolling the nearby 5 cities. The 11 people sent out were all dead, including Hanji. When the news reached LV Gui's ears, his face was pale and unsightly. Collect the corpses, send a coroner to examine them, and report the results to me. After saying this to his subordinates, LV Gui plopped back into his chair. When he sent out this mission, LV Gui did not think that it would fail. But even if he was mentally prepared, he did not think that they would fail so miserably, and that even Hanji would be dead. LV Gui understood Hanji's subordinate quite well. He was not very courageous and could bully people by relying on the might of the tiger, but he was not brave enough to take risks and fight with his life. Logically speaking, such a person would not follow an ordinary embroidered uniform guard to carry out a mission. But why did he die? Could it be that these mercenaries were really so powerful? When he thought of this, LV Gui did not feel happy at all, and instead became very nervous. If it was really like this, would these mercenaries let it go? Would they come to find trouble with him because of this? Humans were like this. The losing side of a battle would always feel that they were weak, as if they were afraid that the other side would not let them go. But LV Gui did not think about it. If he did not send people to investigate, how could there be such a result? LV Gui was still dizzy in the room, and his mood was somewhat uneasy. The coroner he sent out returned with news that the 11 corpses were all killed by gunpowder, but unfortunately, there was no gunpowder residue found on their bodies. Looking at the wounds, it should be that the gunpowder that entered the bodies of the embroidered uniform guards was dug out after they died. Chapter 190. He's already dead. Why won't they let him go? This is going too far. After hearing the coroner's report, Lu Gui roared angrily. But before he could vent his anger, a subordinate came in to report that the Marquis of Loyalty Yang Qindong had arrived with 100 soldiers from the warden's office. They had already passed the gatehouse and were heading towards the inner courtyard. Upon hearing that Yang Qindong had arrived, Lu Gui immediately guessed his intentions. He immediately said anxiously, "Who let them in? Can't you stop them?" "Commander, we can't stop them. Marquis Yang has the command token of the embroidered uniform guard. None of us dared to stop him. The embroidered uniform guard who had reported the news replied with an aggrieved expression. Tell him that I'm not here. As Lu Gui spoke, he looked around. It was clear that he wanted to find a safe place to hide. Bang! With a muffled sound, the door was kicked open from the outside. Yang Qindong, with a murderous look, appeared in front of LV Gui with hundreds of soldiers from the warden's office of the 5 cities. At first there was a cry of alarm, but Lu Gui quickly reacted. He forced himself to remain calm and asked Yang Qindong in a questioning tone, Marquis Yang, what are you doing? Do you know what kind of crime it is to bring people into the embroidered uniform guard? Lu Gui's appearance at this moment was fierce on the outside but timid on the inside. In response to Lu Gui's howls and questioning, the soldiers of the warden's office standing opposite him all laughed coldly. This time, to be able to follow the Marquis of Loyalty into the embroidered uniform guard was a very glorious thing. With today's experience, it was likely that in the future, he would have something to brag about with his colleagues. In the past, it was always the embroidered uniform guard who found trouble with them. Everyone was a soldier and ate grain, but the treatment was very different. Now that Yang Qindong was here, it was different. How awe-inspiring was it to openly charge into the embroidered uniform guard to arrest someone? Just thinking about it made one's blood boil. LV Gui was still shouting, still showing off his might. It could even be said that he was acting shamelessly. Yang Qindong snorted disdainfully and said, as the commander of the embroidered uniform guard, you still have the face to talk about Marquis. Do you know that last night, there were brothers from the embroidered uniform guard who went looking for trouble with the mercenaries? Because of this, they almost injured their people. Now that they are asking for an explanation from us, how do you think I should answer? When Yang Qindong asked this question, Lu Gui suddenly became weak. But when he thought about how Han Ji and the others were already dead, and how there was no evidence that he had sent them on a mission, he regained his confidence. What does this have to do with me? Han Ji and the others did it on their own accord. If you want an explanation, just look for them. Look for them? How can you even say that? You want Marquis to argue with the dead? Yang Qindong continued to ask angrily. But then he suddenly stopped and his voice became much colder. Fine, you can deny it. Right now, those mercenaries want Marquis to give them an explanation. They even said that if they are not satisfied, they will immediately leave the capital. If Walla's army comes, you will be the one to face them. After explaining the seriousness of the matter, Yang Qindong did not waste any more words and turned to leave. He really came in a hurry and left in a hurry. Yang Qindong actually left just like that, causing Lu Gui to be a little confused. But when he thought about what Yang Qindong said, if the mercenaries really left because of this, then who would bear the responsibility of protecting the capital? Would it be him? It was not that he was looking down on himself, but Lu Gui really did not have the confidence to do this matter well. Even Ingzong and Shiheng with 500,000 soldiers had been defeated. How could he win against Walla? Wait, loyal Marquis, wait a moment. Considering the seriousness of the matter, Lu Gui had no choice but to shout. As he shouted, he quickly ran out. If he allowed Yang Qindong to leave just like that, he would be guilty of too much. Of course, Yang Qindong would not leave too quickly. Defending the capital and defeating Walla was part of his plan. Even if no one asked him to do it, he would still do it. What he said just now was just to scare the other party and to gain more benefits. How could he really let the mercenaries leave because of this? How could he really allow Walla, a foreign race, to bully the Han people? After hearing Lu Gui's shout, Yang Qindong naturally stopped. But when he turned around, he still had a serious expression and asked, Commander, why did you call for Marquis? Since you don't know about this matter, I'll ask Eunuch Jean. If Eunuch Jean doesn't care, then just let the mercenaries leave. This Marquis will be able to put down the heavy burden of guarding the capital. Speaking of which, Marquis is still too young. When he took on this task, he was too loyal. Yang Qindong's words made LV Gui even more stunned after hearing it. When he heard that there would be such serious consequences, he knew that this was not something he could bear. Immediately, a smile appeared on his face. Marquis Yang, don't be anxious. Can we discuss this matter properly? Although Han Ji's actions were purely personal, he is still a member of the Imperial Guard. After thinking about it, this commander also has some responsibility. Marquis Yang, how do you want compensation? If the amount is not too large, this commander can do his part. Lu Gui admitted defeat. Yang Qindong smiled in his heart and his face brightened. Good, it's good that you have this attitude. As for the compensation, the mercenaries have already spoken to Marquis. 500,000 taels of silver can settle this matter. Lu Gui was originally smiling, but when he heard the number of 500,000 taels, he immediately jumped up. How much? This is impossible. No, no. Lu Gui was still waving his hands and shouting wildly as if he had been bitten. Yang Qindong snorted coldly. Forget it. Since the commander doesn't have it, I will ask eunuch Jin. If he doesn't have it, then let them leave. Yang Qindong turned around and walked away. He didn't have the slightest reluctance, which made Lu Gui stunned. If the performer did not have an audience, what was the point of such a performance? Marquis Yang, don't be anxious. Let's discuss it again. Lu Gui continued to chase after Yang Qindong. In the palace, Jin Ying, who had been paying attention to the situation, rushed to the emperor's resting quarters as soon as she received the news. The situation in the capital was not stable. In the past few days, many officials were sending their families out of the city. Due to the complicated and chaotic situation, there was no morning court. With Zhu Qiu's permission, the court was changed from 1 day to 1 every 3 days. When Jin Ying arrived at the palace, Zhu Qiu was eating breakfast sent by the imperial kitchen. Oh, my beloved official, you are here. Have you eaten breakfast? Let's eat together. The emperor asked an official to accompany him for breakfast. This was already a great favor. Jin Ying was overwhelmed by the favor. If it had been in the past, she would have sat down and served the emperor's breakfast. But now she was not in the mood to do so. Your Majesty, is there a result from the mercenaries sent to test the waters? What result? Zhu Qiu, who had been indifferent, stopped moving his chopsticks when he heard Jin Ying's words. He raised his head and asked seriously. There are good and bad results. Jin Ying panicked when Zhu Qiu looked at her. For a moment, she did not know how to describe what she wanted to say. What does my beloved official mean? Zhu Qiu was also confused by her words. Perhaps she knew that her description was not appropriate, so Jin Ying hurriedly explained, Your Majesty, the brocade guard followed your orders and went to the mercenaries' temporary camp last night. There were 11 people in total. 11 people died. This morning they all fell in front of the brocade guard yamen. The people I sent to investigate have returned. Last night they faintly heard the sound of gunfire. As he spoke, he observed Zhu Qiu. When he found that Zhu Qiu was listening attentively, he continued, This is the good news. Facts have proven that this mercenary group does indeed possess extraordinary strength, and they are very vigilant. But they asked for compensation on the grounds that someone was spying on their camp. They asked for 500,000 taels of silver. At this time, the Marquis of Loyalty is representing the mercenaries and communicating with the brocade guard commander Lu Gui. Zhu Qiu's expression darkened as he listened to Jin Ying's report. When he knew that the mercenaries were strong, he had more confidence in the defense of the capital. But when he heard that the mercenaries were asking for 500,000 taels of silver as compensation for last night's spying, his expression changed drastically. He said, Can you investigate whether anyone died last night? Your Majesty, the Marquis of Loyalty has already given us the answer. The mercenaries did not die. They were only disturbed for a moment. Jin Ying repeated what Yang Qindong had said to Lu Gui. No casualties? Then why did they ask for 500,000 taels of silver? Do they think that my silver and the national treasury's silver fell from the sky? How preposterous. Zhu Qiu's face was filled with anger. It was obvious that he was angry. It was true that he was the emperor of a country. It was also true that he was wealthy. But the more he was like this, the more he valued his dignity more than anything else. The ones who had died were the brocade guard. The mercenaries had not only killed people but they also wanted money. This was a threat and extortion. As the emperor of a country, if he backed down and agreed to the other party's request, wouldn't he be lowering his head? If that was the case, how could he lead a country in the future? Seeing that the emperor was angry, Jin Ying's expression turned bitter. The thing he was worried about had happened. The emperor wanted face. The mercenaries' actions had clearly touched his dragon scales. This was no longer a matter of 500,000 taels of silver. It was a matter of the country's dignity. Logically speaking, the mercenaries' actions were a little excessive. If it weren't for the fact that the other party had advanced firearms and powerful battle prowess, with Jin Ying's personality, he wouldn't have reported this matter to the emperor. Instead, he would have privately ordered the brocade guards and the East faction guards to arrest these people. At that time, he would use practical actions to tell the other party what they couldn't do and who they couldn't provoke. Chapter 191. But after what had happened last night, he truly didn't have the confidence to do such a thing. And now that the safety of the capital was in danger, he couldn't use violence to suppress the enemy. Otherwise, before Walla's army arrived, he would be thrown into chaos. After all, the emperor had spent a great deal of money to ask Yang Qindong to hire these mercenaries, so there could be no problems at this time. Otherwise, the defense of the capital would probably develop in the worst possible direction. And if Zhu Qiu lost the capital, he would essentially lose the throne. In the south, there was still Ing Zong keeping an eye on this place. If there was a chance to deal a heavy blow to the throne, Ing Zong probably wouldn't show any mercy. If Zhu Qiu was no longer the emperor, what was a great eunuch like him? When the time came, many people would probably try to capture him and bring him to Ing Zong to claim credit. Even if it was for her own sake, Jining still had to warn Zhu Qiu. Even though she knew that he was currently in a bad mood, she still had to say what needed to be said. Your Majesty, a lack of forbearance in small matters will spoil great plans. We've already spent 10 million taels of silver, so we don't mind spending another 500,000 taels. As long as your Majesty agrees, I can privately resolve this problem and do my best to prevent this matter from spreading. What does your Majesty think? Jining wanted to ask Zhu Qiu to back down. As soon as she said this, as the emperor of a country, of course he was displeased. He kept a straight face and didn't say yes or no. Zhu Qiu truly didn't want to lower his head. This was the dignity of a country, not just a matter of 500,000 taels of silver. With his hands behind his back, Zhu Qiu stood up from the table and walked to the window looking into the distance. Although all he could see were tall and majestic palaces, it didn't stop him from expressing his feelings. He was very angry. Jining couldn't help but panic at Zhu Qiu's cold attitude. Your Majesty, this matter can't wait any longer. Please reconsider. The embroidered uniform guard had been the cause of this incident. If the mercenaries were allowed to leave and the capital was lost, all the blame would fall on the head eunuch. He would be the second Wang Zhen, and even the history books would record him as a sinner for all eternity. Therefore, in Jin Ying's heart, even if the mercenaries wanted to leave, it could not be because of the brocade guard. At this moment he really regretted what he did last night. Jin Ying's pleas didn't get any response from Zhu Qiu. He didn't even turn his head. It was as if he hadn't heard anything. What should we do? Jin Ying was very anxious, but as an official, there was nothing he could do about the emperor's attitude. All he could do was sigh in his heart. Reporting. Just as Jin Ying was feeling helpless and Zhu Qiu was speechless, another chief eunuch, Ru Zhu, arrived outside the palace. As soon as he appeared, he knelt on the ground with a panicked expression, his body trembling slightly. Ru Zhu had only been a court eunuch in Dai Zong's time and hadn't been particularly outstanding. After Jin Ying took the throne, this man had quickly been promoted to supervising eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate, a position that had been guaranteed by the dead monk Qian. He was primarily responsible for communicating with the Bureau of Military Personnel and was in charge of military affairs. Jin Ying was standing at the gate. When he saw that it was Ru Zhu, he instinctively believed that the matter had gotten out of hand and that LV Gue had not received the decree and was not willing to pay, so the mercenaries were preparing to leave the capital. When he thought of this possibility, his face paled. Is there something important? There is. The Bureau of Military Personnel has just received news from scouts that the vanguard of the Walla army is less than 150 li from the capital. Tomorrow they will appear at the walls of the capital. As Ru Zhu spoke, he raised his head, revealing a panicked expression. What? Repeat that for us. Zhu Qiu, who had been facing away from the gate, finally turned around. Not only that, he quickly walked over to Ru Zhu, who was still kneeling on the ground. When Ru Zhu saw that the emperor was asking, he didn't dare to hesitate and immediately replied, reporting to your Majesty, the Bureau of Military Personnel has sent news that the vanguard of the Walla army, 10,000 cavalry, is heading toward the capital. They are less than 150 li from here and will arrive at the city gates tomorrow. So fast? Hearing that the Walla cavalry would arrive at the city gates tomorrow, Zhu Qiu's face became serious and panicked. The other party was an elite cavalry. Although there were only 10,000 of them, the 10,000 ordinary soldiers in the city couldn't compare to them. Although there wasn't much difference in numbers, more than half of the great Ming dynasty's elites had been lost in the Battle of the Tumu Fortress. Later on, when Admiral Shi Heng led the troops to battle, he had taken the remaining elites with him. Now there was only a second-rate army left in the city. How could they stop the Walla army? Thinking that the Walla army would be at the foot of the capital tomorrow and that they might charge into the capital tomorrow, his position as emperor might come to an end, he couldn't help but stagger a few steps and his body became unstable. Jining reacted quickly and quickly reached out to support Zhu Qiu, who was 30 years younger than her, and asked with concern, "Your Majesty, are you all right?" "Jin is fine. Beloved subject, the enemy's cavalry is about to arrive. What can we do?" Zhu Qiu no longer had the stern look on his face. In exchange he was panicking and lost his mind. It had to be said that Zhu Qiu was miserable enough. He wasn't even 22 years old, but under the urging of his officials, he had taken over a mess in this chaotic world. Then accidents happened again and again. He, who hadn't fully grasped the imperial power, was like a small boat in the ocean that could be swallowed by the waves at any time. How could he not be nervous and afraid? "Your Majesty, it's fine. Don't we still have the mercenaries? Moreover, the loyal Marquis has already taken charge of guarding the capital. It's time for them to show their loyalty to the country," Jining advised as she supported Zhu Qiu. Right, there's still the loyal Marquis and the mercenaries. How about this? Immediately take out 500,000 taels of silver from the national treasury to the loyal Marquis and the mercenaries. But remember, last night's incident was the embroidered uniform guard acting on their own. It has nothing to do with us. This silver can only be considered what the embroidered uniform guard owes us. In this dire situation, Zhu Qiu finally relented, but he did not forget the dignity of the sovereign of a country. Jining also knew that in this situation, this was not the time to haggle over the 500,000 taels of silver, so she immediately agreed. "Your Majesty, be at ease. This subject will handle this matter and will definitely handle it beautifully. I will not lose face and decorum for the imperial household." Good. With beloved subject handling matters, we are at ease. "Quickly go and handle it," Zhu Qiu said with a hint of anxiety. At this moment, all his hopes were placed on Yang Qindong and the mercenaries he had spent a fortune to hire. The Yamen of the embroidered uniform guard. LV Gue was currently drinking tea with Yang Qindong. The two of them did not communicate much, but in their hearts, they both knew that they were waiting for news from the imperial palace. After all, this involved 500,000 taels of silver and the imperial household's face. The final decision still needed the emperor's decree. Yang Qindong, who was sipping his tea unhurriedly, showed enough confidence at this moment. He insisted that Zhu Qiu would definitely give in. All of this came from the news he had received last night. The Walla's vanguard cavalry of 10,000 people was approaching the great Ming dynasty's capital. If nothing unexpected happened, they would arrive at the city tomorrow. The Yangxia Security Bureau was willing to spend a lot of silver and gold. The information they received was even earlier than the great Ming dynasty's imperial household. However, this news would probably reach the imperial palace today and reach Zhu Qiu's ears. Then the new emperor would have no choice but to give in. Speaking of which, Yang Qindong did not lack the 500,000 taels of silver. However, he insisted on doing this to warn all parties not to easily inquire about the mercenaries. Otherwise, the consequences would be very serious. Presumably, after what happened this morning, whoever had such an idea would have to think twice before acting. Maintaining the mystery of the mercenaries was also of great significance for future actions. This was also part of the plan to pave the way for some future actions. With such a significance, in order to achieve the goal, what could he do even if he had to confront the genie guards? This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If he did not do it openly at this time, he was afraid that it would be more troublesome to do it in the future. Yang Qindong's indifference and confidence in LV Gui's eyes made him even more anxious. Unconsciously, there was a difference in the momentum between the two people. Psychologically, Yang Qindong had already won a round. LV Gue even had a thought in his heart that it was better not to provoke this person in the future. Because no matter what, it seemed that he would be the one to suffer in the end. In the past, LV Gue would not have dared to think that someone would dare to cause trouble in the genie guards. It was good enough that he did not bring people to cause trouble. Who would dare to take the initiative to come to the door? But today not only did it happen, but he also had no way to deal with it. This made it difficult for him. In his heart, he only wanted the emperor and eunuch Jin to quickly make a decision. He even faintly thought in his heart, wasn't it just 500,000 taels of silver? Just give it to the loyal Marquis. LV Gui's heart had already begun to show weakness. It was at this time that Ru Zhu arrived. At the same time, he brought the emperor's oral decree for the genie guards commander LV Gue. In the inner hall of the genie guards, LV Gue knelt to receive the imperial decree, appearing extremely respectful. It was worth mentioning that Yang Qindong only stood up from the chair when Ru Zhu was about to deliver the emperor's decree. He did not have the slightest intention of kneeling on the ground. Just this kind of behavior was a great disrespect. Logically speaking, it was enough to arrest him. But at this time, whether it was the supervising eunuch Ru Zhu or the genie guard's commander LV Gue, they cleverly pretended not to see. At this time, it was not the time to have a dispute. Chapter 192. His Majesty's verbal decree. The genie guards acted recklessly and attracted the displeasure of the mercenaries, so they should be punished. But considering the national crisis, Zhen will remember this matter. As for the 500,000 taels, Zhen will withdraw it from the national treasury first. Later, Zhen will slowly deduct it from the genie guard's yamen. Also, I hope Lu Gue can learn from this lesson and control his subordinates well. Don't do things that are not beneficial to the country. With a serious face and warning tone, Ru Zhu reprimanded Lu Gue on behalf of the emperor. Finally, there was a result, and it was the compensation method he had thought of. LV Gue breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. He was not worried about being reprimanded at all. This matter was originally the emperor's idea. He was just taking the blame on behalf of others. Nothing would happen. This subject receives the decree and thanks His Majesty's grace. Lu Gue knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times to show respect to the emperor. After Ru Zhu finished telling Lu Gue about the emperor's instructions, he turned to Yang Qindong and said, "Loyal Marquis, the emperor also has a verbal decree for you. This subject receives the decree." Yang Qindong cupped his fists. His face was very respectful, but the words he said were not respectful at all, asking the envoy to pass on my behalf. This subject fell off a horse during the Battle of Earth and Wood, which triggered an old injury. Now I can't kneel asking for forgiveness. When Zhu Qiu of Ying sect was still alive, he let Yang Qindong organize 3rd Princess Changda's birthday banquet. To put it bluntly, he was just looking for trouble out of jealousy. At that time, after Yang Qindong organized the birthday banquet, in order to not give others an excuse to deal with him, he lied that he fell off a horse and injured his body. Now he said that he fell off a horse during the Battle of Earth and Wood, which triggered an old injury so he couldn't kneel. Speaking of which, it was a coincidence. But he didn't think about it. The current Yang Qindong wasn't even 20 years old. Even if he really suffered an injury at this age, he should have recovered. However, he still used this as an excuse. It was clear that he did not respect the imperial power. When Ru Zhu heard this, he was dissatisfied. However, considering that it was time to put the other party in an important position, if he haggled over such a small matter and delayed the important matter, the gains would not make up for the losses. Thus he could only close one eye and say, "It's fine." The emperor's verbal order is only for the Marquis of Zhongdan and this eunuch to discuss how to retreat from the enemy. Right, Walla's vanguard cavalry will arrive at the capital tomorrow, but how will the loyal Marquis deal with them? As the supervising eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate, Ru Zhu had the authority to give orders on military matters. At this moment he was asking about how to deal with the enemy. Naturally, it was within the scope of his authority, so it was reasonable. Of course, Yang Qindong knew who Ru Zhu was. He also knew that Ru Zhu was here on behalf of the imperial power. To put it bluntly, Ru Zhu was here to supervise the army and monitor his every move. This was also one of the characteristics of the great Ming dynasty. No matter where the war occurred, no matter how large the scale of the war, there would always be eunuchs participating in supervising the army. This was also a sign that the emperor wanted to control everything in his hands. However, he did not know that it was a great taboo for someone who did not know how to fight to lead an army. Just like in Tumu Castle, Guijing, as the supervising eunuch, played a role in restricting the great Ming dynasty's elite army, causing them to lose the best opportunity to fight due to internal friction and suffer a crushing defeat. With the previous example, how could Yang Qindong allow eunuchs to participate in military matters? Immediately, he replied with a serious expression. "Eunuch Ru, as for how to deal with the enemy, I still need to discuss with the mercenaries. Of course, with the 500,000 taels of silver, we can show our sincerity. As for how to fight the war, I'm afraid that right now, it's not up to you or me to decide. So it's like this. However, I don't know if this eunuch can go with the loyal Marquis to take a look at the mercenaries' barracks?" Ru Zhu said with a modest expression. This was also Zhu Qiu's intention. Although it was true that the mercenaries were invited by Yang Qindong, they were using his money. He couldn't monopolize them, could he? If possible, he would have his own people contact the mercenaries. If he could use them, wouldn't it be better? He wouldn't have to trouble the loyal Marquis with everything. To put it bluntly, he was burning the bridge after crossing the river. Zhu Qiu wanted to get rid of Yang Qindong, the middleman. Among the people, this was called forgetting one's mother after getting a wife. How could Yang Qindong not see through this little trick? No one knew that the mercenaries were actually the new Yangxia army under his command. The only reason he didn't reveal this relationship was because the timing wasn't right. As for people wanting to take advantage of the cold front, he wasn't worried at all. It was simply a waste of wax for a blind man to light a lamp. Because it wasn't time to reveal this relationship, Yang Qindong wouldn't make any decisions on behalf of the mercenaries. Instead, he said to Ru Zhu with a smile, "Eunuch Ru wants to go to the mercenaries' barracks to take a look. Marquis naturally welcomes you. However, I can't make the decision on their side. If something unpleasant happens, I hope that Eunuch Ru won't be angry." Hearing that Yang Qindong allowed it, Ru Zhu's face was immediately filled with joy. As long as this person didn't obstruct him, he was confident that he could make friends with the mercenaries. After all, the other party came to make money. Whose money wasn't money? He had the emperor as his backing and the national treasury's silver as his backing. As long as he was willing to spend money, he wasn't afraid that he wouldn't be able to convince the mercenaries. As if afraid that Yang Qindong would go back on his word, Ru Zhu hurriedly said, "No problem, no problem. When the time comes, just introduce me to them. As for the other matters, I'll take care of them." "Good, then prepare the silver and set out." Yang Qindong's face was full of smiles. Good. Ru Zhu hurriedly agreed. Then he turned to Lu Gue and said, "Commander, I'll have to trouble you to send some people to escort 500,000 taels of silver from the national treasury to the mercenaries' compound. Thank you for your trouble." Ru Zhu and Lu Gue were both eunuch Jin's trusted aides. Their positions were also very close, so it was natural for them to be polite. To this, Lu Gue also politely replied, "It's my duty, it's my duty. I'll arrange for people to do it right away." The morning's questioning finally had a result. In the end, it ended with the imperial power backing down. Of course, to the outside world, this was the embroidered uniform guards backing down, not the emperor backing down. The 100 embroidered uniform guards pushed out 10 large carriages. In each carriage there were 10 large chests. A total of 500,000 taels of silver headed straight for the mercenaries' barracks. As if afraid that Yang Qindong would do something bad, when Lu Gue went to arrange for people to go to the national treasury to get the silver, Ru Zhu accompanied him the entire time. He really didn't leave his side and didn't give him any space or time to spread the news. However, what Ru Zhu didn't know was that when Yang Qindong faced him, he stood with his hands behind his back. The hands behind his back were constantly making gestures to convey what he wanted to say. All of this was clearly seen by Tiger's Mane, who was standing behind him as a servant. After understanding what the young master wanted to say, he quietly left. Ru Zhu didn't care about this at all. He only wanted to keep an eye on Yang Qindong so that he didn't spread the news, especially not to the mercenaries. Other people and matters were not within his scope of concern. Just like this, Ru Zhu accompanied Yang Qindong until the silver was prepared. Only then did Ru Zhu happily ask the loyal Marquis to accompany him to the mercenaries' courtyard. Yang Qindong gladly agreed, and the group left the embroidered uniform guards' yamen in a grandiose manner. Along the way, this group quickly attracted the attention of the common people they encountered. Spies from the Bureau of Security had already been planted in the crowd. With their intentional spread, the news that the embroidered uniform guard was looking for trouble with the mercenaries protecting the capital quickly spread. Many common people began to reprimand the embroidered uniform guard, and the balance of public opinion began to tilt in favor of the mercenaries. Leading public opinion for one's own use had not been noticed at the time, but Yang Qindong knew that in many cases, obtaining the support of the common people was already half the battle. Of course, there was no need for him to explain these things that would later be regarded as the truth to others. There was a wide road in front of the mercenaries' courtyard. He had only chosen this place because he had considered the problem of gathering an army. When Yang Qindong and Ru Zhu arrived, it naturally didn't feel crowded at all. This place is not bad. Loyal Marquis is quite considerate. Ru Zhu seemed intent on getting close to Yang Qindong, and he would only be satisfied with a few words of praise for this courtyard. Regarding this, Yang Qindong only smiled without saying anything. He naturally knew what the other party was thinking. If it weren't for the fact that he was still useful, the other party would have already coldly glared at him and even tried to make trouble for him. For this eunuch who had no emotions and only cared about profit and power, Yang Qindong was already giving him a lot of face by showing him some courtesy. As for any words of thanks or praise, that was simply out of the question. Since the cold vanguard had already entered the capital, no one would be able to make things difficult for him in the future. This was a display of his confidence. Yang Qindong's nonchalant attitude and silent smile along the way was seen by Ru Zhu, and in exchange he sneered coldly in his heart. He had already decided that once he got involved with the mercenaries, the loyal marquis would just go wherever he wanted to go. Even eunuchs would look down on nobles who relied on the power of others. At the entrance of the courtyard, 4 cold vanguard soldiers stood at attention. They held a black and cold 95 style in their hands, and the gleaming bayonets on the body of the spear gave off an intimidating aura. How mighty! Ru Zhu praised sincerely after seeing the might of the 4 mercenaries from afar. As they spoke, the group arrived at the entrance of the courtyard. 4 gleaming bayonets were placed horizontally in front of everyone. This is an important military area. Unrelated people are not allowed to disturb us. Please leave quickly or else bear the consequences. The 4 cold vanguard soldiers didn't show the slightest hint of fear despite the size of the group. On the contrary, they even took the initiative to speak. Chapter 193. Yang Qindong stood in the middle of the crowd and watched all of this with an indifferent expression. He had no intention of walking out. He had not come into contact with the cold front for a long time. He also wanted to see the mental state of this troop from the side. Ru Zhu stood in the front row of the crowd. Especially when he was about to reach the entrance of the courtyard, he intentionally quickened his pace. His intention to seize the opportunity was very obvious. Yang Qindong was happy to see this happen. That was because he knew that the cold front would not treat Ru Zhu well just because of some silver. If they really did that, it would be equivalent to being expelled from the cold front. Only with iron discipline would an iron army appear. Yang Qindong was very confident in this point. However, some people did not know about this. After seeing that the front was blocked, Ru Zhu took the initiative to walk out. He then put on a smile on his face and bowed respectfully as he said, "Brothers, please allow me to report. I am a supervising eunuch of the Great Ming's Imperial Horse Directorate. This time I am here to deliver the silver. Do you think you can let us pass? Step back. If you take half a step forward, you will be killed without mercy." In response to Ru Zhu's attempt to curry favor with him, the platoon leader of the cold front, who was standing guard at the entrance, had a serious expression on his face. At the same time, he pulled the bolt of the 95 style gun in his hand and a murderous aura spread out in all directions. In the past, Ru Zhu was only an internal envoy. When had he ever seen such a scene? He was immediately frightened and involuntarily stepped back. His mouth trembled as he said, "This eunuch is really here to deliver the silver. If you don't believe me, you can call your general out to verify my authenticity. Who is making a racket outside the courtyard? Do you know that this is a military area? Unrelated people are not allowed to come near." A shout came from inside the gate. Then, the sound of orderly footsteps could be heard. Soon after, a dozen or so cold front soldiers led by Ting Shan walked out of the courtyard. As soon as these people appeared, they raised the 95 style and held it in their hands. Then, they coldly stared at the Great Ming Empire's embroidered uniform guards outside the door with hawk-like eyes. It was as if they were ready to fight if they didn't get along. The embroidered uniform guards were considered ferocious. Who knew how many people were bullied by them? From commoners to merchants to officials and nobles, who wouldn't tremble when they saw them, afraid that they would be remembered? This also made them feel superior to others. But for some reason, the moment he saw Lung Feng, a chill rushed out from the soles of his feet. It felt as if he was being targeted by a ferocious tiger and could become a piece of meat in its stomach at any moment. Some of the more timid embroidered uniform guards didn't even know where to put their hands and feet. They just lowered their heads and didn't say a word. Ru Zhu also felt a chill spreading from his head to his feet. He did not know that this was because Ting Shan and the others had killed too many people on Little Ryukyu Island. However, no matter how scared he was, since he received the imperial order, he always wanted to complete the mission. After he raised his head and saw Ting Shan's murderous aura, he immediately lowered his head. Then he tried to use a negotiating tone and said, "General, I am a supervising eunuch of the Great Ming's Imperial Horse Directorate. This time, I am here on the orders of our emperor to deliver silver to you." Deliver silver? Hearing Ruju's words, Tingshan's murderous aura seemed to have cooled down a lot. Sensing that the other party's tone seemed to have loosened, Ruju thought to himself that silver was indeed the most useful thing. He immediately said, "Yes, yes, we are here to deliver silver to you. However, how should I address you, General? Are you the highest-ranking leader here? This battalion commander isn't the highest-ranking leader? What? Are you looking down on this battalion commander's low position?" Tingshan looked at Ruju with an ice-cold gaze. His murderous aura reappeared. Ruju only asked about the other party's identity and position because he wanted to get to know the other party's higher-ups in the shortest time possible and establish a good relationship with them. He really didn't have any other intentions. However, after being reminded by Tingshan and thinking about his previous behavior, he seemed to be a little too impatient. For a moment, Ruju regretted his impatient actions. He opened his mouth and said, "No, no, this general misunderstood. This eunuch didn't mean that. Leave your money and get out of here." Tingshan had no intention of listening to Ruju's explanation. He seemed to have been angered by Ruju's words. At this moment, he waved his hand and looked like he was going to chase them away. "Leave your silver and scram." This was completely different from what Ruju had imagined. For a moment he couldn't accept it. "General, shouldn't you call your leader over and discuss this?" Bang, 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 bang. A series of gunshots rang out, and the tiles on the roof of the house opposite the courtyard were broken into countless pieces. Then the tiles fell from above, raising waves of dust. Tingshan opened fire. This was how he answered Ruju's question. Facts speak louder than words. After a series of gunshots, all the brocade gown guards present were stunned on the spot. Then someone shouted, "Oh my God!" Next, the brocade gown guards gave up on their carriages and retreated in large strides. Ruju was also in the crowd. In fact, his speed of retreat was not slower than anyone else. It had to be said that in the face of life-threatening danger, even a eunuch's reaction could be surprisingly fast. Everyone was retreating. Soon Yang Qindong, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and Qiu Vi of the first guard who had been standing in the crowd appeared. Initially, when Tingshan saw that some people did not retreat, he revealed a trace of anger. He wanted to teach them a lesson for ignoring his cold front. However, when the crowd retreated and Yang Qindong stood at the very front, Tingshan, who originally had a ferocious look on his face and looked like he would attack at any moment, immediately turned into astonishment, followed by excitement and agitation. His originally straight and strong legs now looked like they were about to bend and kneel on the ground. The earliest cold front was personally trained by Yang Qindong. Even Lung Feng, who was in his later years, had only heard legends about the sixth young master. It could be said that in the most elite of the cold front, if there was only one person who could not be disrespected, and who everyone respected and had to give a thumbs up to, it would be Yang Qindong. Even Commander Lung Song of the army, although he also had the word Leng in his name, he only wore the army's Lung Feng uniform. It was more like in the Navy, Commander Gao Xiong's uniform. However, with only Yang Qindong, no matter if it was the army, the navy, or even the air force who were practicing hot air balloons, they all respected him. He had a godlike reputation. When Tingshan saw him, how could he not want to kneel on the ground? Cough. With a soft cough, Yang Qindong could tell what Tingshan was going to do and what kind of performance he was going to show. He immediately reminded him. Although the cough was not loud, it shocked Tingshan like a sudden clap of thunder. When he saw Commander Ru and a group of Imperial Guards looking at him from the corner of his eyes, he finally remembered where he was and what kind of situation he was in. Tingshan forcefully put away his thoughts of kneeling and bowing to Yang Qindong. Then he made a gesture of inviting him in. Following Tingshan's action, all the cold front soldiers standing on both sides of him straightened their bodies as if they were soldiers waiting for the king to inspect them. Some of these cold front soldiers were personally trained by Yang Qindong, some of their military ranks were taught by the sixth young master, and some of them did not know Yang Qindong. However, this did not stop them from expressing their respect for the young master. He really wanted to say something to these brothers, even if it was just to pat them on the shoulder and give them some encouragement. However, Yang Qindong knew that this was not the time to do this. If he appeared too close to the mercenaries, it would be hard to avoid suspicion. This would not be beneficial to his next plan. With his back facing Commander Ru and the others, Yang Qindong could only smile at these cold front soldiers. However, this smile was like the sun in the cold winter, making these brothers feel a warmth from the bottom of their hearts. At this moment, their hearts were beating rapidly. This was the godlike sixth young master, and he was smiling at them? With this experience, they would be able to brag about it for a while when they returned to Crimson City. Teng Shan also suppressed the excitement in his heart. After Yang Qindong stepped into the courtyard, he quickly followed him. At this moment, a large group of people had already knelt down in the courtyard. The leaders were Commander Lung Song and Battalion Commander Wu Sheng. "Welcome, sixth young master." The voice was low, but it was more like the ray of sunlight before dawn, ready to explode with powerful energy at any time. "Brothers, thank you for your hard work." Facing close to 300 cold front soldiers, Yang Qindong was also very excited. In his eyes, these were his children. They were created by him and they were also his pride. The words "thank you for your hard work" caused many cold front soldiers who would not even blink in the face of death to cry. Perhaps to them, these were the words they had been waiting for. Yang Qindong was also very excited in his heart. At this time he felt as if he had returned to the barracks of his previous life, and saw those outstanding soldiers he had brought with him. This made him unable to calm down. However, Yang Qindong, who had lived 2 lives, knew what he wanted to protect, what he pursued, and what his dreams were. In order to achieve this final goal, he could not do whatever he wanted at this moment. Hence, he suppressed the excitement in his heart and walked in front of Lung Song. He patted his shoulder and said, "Not bad, you're more sturdy than before." "Thank you, sixth young master, for your praise." Lung Song, who did not like to smile and always had a stern face in the eyes of the soldiers, actually smiled at this moment. His smile was so carefree, so natural, and so sincere. Chapter 194. He walked up to Ting Shan, who had just returned to his unit, and lightly nodded. Extending a hand, he smoothed out Ting Shan's uniform. "Very good. You're much more spirited than before." "Thank you, sixth young master, for your praise," Ting Shan replied in a low voice, suppressing his excitement. Taking another step forward, Yang Qindong arrived in front of Wu Sheng. Extending his right hand, he formed a fist and punched Wu Sheng's chest. "Very good. I heard that you've worked very hard. Now that you're a battalion commander, keep it up." Wu Sheng did not complain after being punched. On the contrary, he excitedly called out, "Sixth young master, please be at ease. Wu Sheng will definitely perform even better and strive to become regimental commander as soon as possible, surpassing regiment commander Lung Song and becoming his commanding officer." This cry immediately drew laughter from the other members of the Cold Front. One by one, it took him a full hour to greet each of his brothers. He could still call out the names of some of them, but he didn't recognize some of them. However, this didn't stop them from quickly becoming friends and brothers. Lung Song, Ting Shan, and Wu Sheng followed at Yang Qindong's side, introducing each of their unfamiliar brothers to him, recounting the contributions they had made, the areas in which they had excelled, and their individual characteristics. In this hour, Yang Qindong had gained a deeper understanding of the 300 Cold Front members. At this moment, the 500,000 taels of silver had been carried into the courtyard. Even the Cold Front members who had been guarding the gate had entered the courtyard to greet the sixth young master. "Very good. Your performance has greatly pleased this young master. You truly live up to the name of the Cold Front." Once everyone stood in line in front of Yang Qindong, the founder of the Cold Front began to speak. "The Cold Front is like the cold edge of a weapon. But it has a purpose, and it is unyielding, unstoppable, and invincible. Today you were able to stand out from the rest of the Cold Front and come to the capital, come to this young master's side. This is even more proof of your excellence, that you are outstanding members of the Cold Front. For this reason this young master is proud of you." After a round of encouragement, Yang Qindong sensed that the morale of the Cold Front soldiers had risen to an unprecedented level. Yang Qindong's face, which was originally full of smiles, suddenly changed and became much more serious. "I don't care what kind of glorious past you have and what kind of outstanding performance you have. But now, this young master hopes that you can forget everything about the past and face the reality before you again. That is, you will be fighting against 10, 100, or even 1,000 people by yourself. I wonder if you can do it?" "Yes." With a low growl, the veins on the necks of the Cold Front members tightened, as if they would burst at any moment. This was their way of expressing their desire for victory and their confidence in themselves. "Very good. Now, I give the order for those who should rest to rest. The 3 battalion commanders, come with me." Yang Qindong knew that tomorrow's battle would descend, so in order for the soldiers to face the enemy with full energy and vigor, he gave the order for them to rest. With the order to disperse, the 300 Cold Front members left in an orderly fashion. There was not the slightest bit of panic in the process. This was the performance of a true elite force. From this, one could see that the great effort Yang Qindong had put into training them in formation had been effective. Lung Song, Ting Shan, and Wu Xing followed Yang Qindong to a secret room deep within the courtyard. Qiu Vi led a group of guards to search the place. After confirming that there was nothing suspicious or dangerous, Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei flanked Yang Qindong on either side. It wasn't that Yang Qindong didn't trust Lung Feng's team, but as a leader he should have such an imposing manner. It was said that sometimes distance makes the heart grow fonder. Between a superior and a subordinate, there should be enough distance. Otherwise, if the relationship was too close, there would be a lack of mystery. Naturally, when he wanted to lead them, the words he said would be somewhat discounted. Tiger's Mane and the others' actions were seen by Lung Song and the other two. If it were anyone else who dared to treat them like this, they would have been furious and would have even taken out their weapons to fight. However, this was allowed by the sixth young master, so they did not dare to show the slightest displeasure or displeasure. Speaking of which, all of this was thanks to Luan Shaoqian and Mo Qingyu, and the other political instructors. It was because of the existence of these political instructors that they constantly told the Cold Front members about the brilliance and greatness of the sixth young master. Gradually, everyone began to view Yang Qindong as a god. Because of this, who would dare to disobey his orders? Not to mention disobeying anything, if anyone dared to say anything bad about the sixth young master, who knew how many people would put that person to death in an instant. At this point, even Lung Song, the only regiment commander in the army, did not dare to have any other thoughts or actions. Perhaps a regiment commander's position was already very high, and could be said to be the true commander of the army. But if he dared to say that Yang Qindong was not good, he was afraid that even the brothers who had the best relationship with him would turn against him because of this. This was the power of political instructors. They were able to eliminate the possibility of betrayal from the Cold Front members. Yang Qindong sat at the head of the table. Tiger's Mane then spread out a map that he had already drawn on the table. Yang Qindong pointed at it and said, "Come and see." Outside the courtyard, looking at the closed door, Ruju was not willing to leave like this. Thus he did not leave. Instead he stood on the street and waited. However, this wait lasted for more than 2 hours. Fortunately, there was an accompanying eunuch who got a wooden stool for him to sit on. Otherwise he would not have been able to hold on. Why hasn't the loyal Marquis come out yet? Could it be that something has happened? One of the accompanying embroidered uniform guard Baihu saw that so much time had passed, but there was still no movement from the small courtyard. He could not help but ask suspiciously. "Don't speak nonsense." Ruju's face stiffened as if he was reprimanding him. However, in his heart he was thinking that it would be best if something happened to Yang Qindong. If that was the case, the matter of communicating with the mercenaries would fall to him. At that time he would be able to reap a lot of benefits. The greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. Just as Ruju was thinking about this, the door suddenly opened. Yang Qindong, dressed in green, walked out in large strides. As soon as Yang Qindong appeared, Ruju's eyes were fixed on him. He wanted to see if there would be any important figures from the mercenaries coming out to see him off. If that was the case, he could take the opportunity to say a few words and get familiar with them first. Unfortunately, only Yang Qindong and his servants came out. Not a single mercenary came out to see them off. This caused Ruju's face to be filled with disappointment. However, what he did not know was that the disappointment was yet to come. After Yang Qindong walked out of the courtyard, he directly came to Ruju and said with a serious expression, "Eunuch Ru, I have already tried my best to communicate with the mercenary generals. However, they did not agree to a eunuch being in charge of the army. They also said that since they have received the money, they naturally would not let the Walla army take the capital." After saying this, Yang Qindong shrugged his shoulders, looking as if he was powerless. Ruju felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He was frozen in place for who knew how long before he came back to his senses. At this time, Yang Qindong had already walked past him, heading in the direction of the immortal abode with his servants. "Wait a moment, Marquis Yang. What is going on here? The imperial supervisor has always been in the great Ming dynasty. Why are they making an exception now?" "I don't think this will work," Ruju said with a face full of unwillingness. He had already patted his chest in front of the emperor and Jining, saying that he would use the war as an opportunity to establish a good relationship with the mercenaries. He would also do his best to obtain a few new firearms, providing the best specimens for the great Ming dynasty's development. But now, even his authority to supervise the army had been taken away. Didn't that mean that this wish could no longer be fulfilled? Yang Qindong stopped in his tracks when Ru Zhu called out to him. He suddenly turned around and said, "Eunuch Ru, you said that this is the law of the great Ming dynasty, but these people do not belong to the great Ming, so they do not need to follow it. Of course, if Eunuch Ru is not satisfied, you can ask them yourself. However, if you provoke their displeasure, then you will have to take responsibility for the consequences. Right, I must remind you that the vanguard cavalry of the Walla will arrive tomorrow. It would be best if nothing unexpected were to happen." As if it was a kind reminder, Yang Qindong turned around and left with a hearty laugh, leaving behind a stunned Ru Xing. He was filled with unwillingness and resentment. Of course, he wanted to do as Yang Qindong said and ask the mercenaries about the great Ming dynasty's rules. However, after the embroidered uniform guard's reckless actions last night, he didn't dare to do that again. What if he really angered them and they demanded money again? He had already paid 500,000 taels. He had already lost face once. Was he going to lose face a second time? AI. Ru Zhu let out a long sigh. He knew that he would not be able to complete the decree this time. He really didn't know that the emperor would be so furious after finding out about this. It seemed that he still needed to greet eunuch Jining and protect his current position first. As for forming a good relationship with the mercenaries once the war started, it wouldn't end in a day or two. When the time came, an opportunity should appear. Putting aside the fact that Ru Zhu went to the palace to find Jining and reported what happened to the emperor, it caused Zhu Qiu to be extremely angry. The news quickly spread in the city that the 10,000 elite vanguard cavalry of the Walla would arrive in the capital tomorrow. When the news came out, the entire city was terrified. Some people began to pack their bags and prepare to leave the capital. Some cowards who had nowhere else to go began to pray at home, hoping that the great Ming dynasty's army could win a battle and defeat the wolves of the Walla. Chapter 195. The capital, which had just regained its peace due to the low price of rice, was once again bustling with activity. In the immortal abode, the girls were also affected. They all came over to ask Yang Qindong, who was practicing calligraphy, what was going on outside. Why was the commander still so calm when the battle was about to begin? Yang Qindong had unknowingly become obsessed with writing. In his last life, he had been running all over the place to complete missions. How could he possibly find the time to compose himself and write? Now that he finally had the time and opportunity, he naturally had to put in some effort. At the very least, when he inscribed words for someone in the future, they wouldn't look too bad. Sixth brother, sixth brother. A series of feminine voices came from outside the study. Yang Qindong, who was in the middle of writing, sighed softly. He knew that his plans to practice calligraphy today had been dashed. He only had 4 women and it was already so lively. He really didn't know what it would be like with the addition of other women in the future. At this moment, Yang Qindong suddenly missed the old Yang clan residence in Jianghu Manor. Back then he could really do whatever he wanted and no one would bother him. While Yang Qindong was still reminiscing about the old days, Hu Yan and the other 3 girls ran in. As soon as they saw Yang Qindong still holding the pen, they immediately surrounded him and for a while they kept asking him questions. Yang Qindong couldn't tell who was asking what, but he had a rough idea of what was going on. The 4 women all wanted to know if they could defeat the Walla cavalry tomorrow. That was the cavalry that had defeated Ying Zong and Shi Heng. They were all worried for Yang Qindong. Well, your husband knows what you are worried about. How about this? Tomorrow all of you will put on makeup and go to the battlefield with Lu Lang. What do you think? Yang Qindong suddenly raised his voice and said something that shocked the 4 women. Since ancient times, it had been an ironclad rule that men should fight on the battlefield and women should stay at home. Apart from Hua Mulan and the female generals of the Yang clan, very few women were allowed to fight on the battlefield. However, Yang Qindong just had to make this request. How could these women not be shocked? Oh, Lu Lang, are you okay? Can we go to the battlefield too? Hu Yan's face was filled with disbelief. At the same time, her face was flushed red. Obviously, this proposal had touched her nerves and made her begin to yearn for it. Of course, I've already prepared your clothes. I borrowed them from the mercenaries and put them in your room. Take them and see if they fit you. Yang Qindong's eyes were as clear as a spring, and his face was full of love. When the 4 women heard this, they immediately ignored Yang Qindong and walked towards their rooms. After a short while, the 4 girls in camouflage uniforms returned to Yang Qindong. They were also in camouflage uniforms. When the 4 women wore the custom-made camouflage uniforms, their graceful figures were immediately highlighted. They actually had such a temperament and were so different from the rest. Hu Yan and the other 2 women looked at each other and chattered non-stop. Only Qiao Yin, who knew the truth, kept smiling. She knew that these clothes were not borrowed at all. They had already arranged for the garment factory in Crimson City to make them according to the women's figures. At that time, the concept of men being superior to women was very serious. Even the few men who loved their wives would be called a lioness from Hudong. Sometimes, these men had to worry about other people's opinions and do some things that hurt women. Only Yang Qindong really doted on his women. When he did things, he did not care about other people's opinions and thoughts. While the women were satisfied with the military uniform, they were even more satisfied with Yang Qindong's attitude towards them. This was what made them happy. Seeing the 4 women slowly calm down from their excitement, Yang Qindong smiled and said, "These clothes are not for you to wear for free. There is a mission." "There is a mission. What mission?" When Hu Yan and the other 2 women heard that there was a mission, their breathing became a lot more rapid. They even wondered if Lu Lang really wanted them to go to the battlefield. But what could they do without the strength to truss a chicken? The 4 women looked at him suspiciously. Yang Qindong chuckled and said, "What are you thinking? How can I be willing to let you fight the enemy? Your task is to record the most wonderful scene on the battlefield, then go back and edit it into a program for more people to watch, and completely spread the glorious image of Lu Lang." Yang Qindong said very arrogantly. Hu Yan and the other 2 women laughed. But after laughing, they felt deeply gratified. Since Lu Lang dared to let them walk around the battlefield, it was enough to show that he was full of confidence in this battle. In fact, this was the real reason why Yang Qindong wanted to take the women to the battlefield. If he wanted to make a program, he could have learned it from the soldiers who participated in the battle in the future. But he did not do that. Instead, he wanted to take them with him. He wanted to tell the women through this battle that the battlefield was not as dangerous as they imagined. At least on the battlefield with him, Yang Qindong, they could still be very relaxed. After tomorrow's battle, when Yang Qindong went out to lead troops to battle in the future, the women would not have to be so worried and afraid at home. The 4 girls left in high spirits. From the looks of it, it was clear that they were going to wear the new military uniforms and walk around the Yangjia village for everyone to see. They were going to receive some envious gazes. Yang Qindong stayed in the study, discussing something with Tiger's man and Yang San about tomorrow's battle. "Yang San, is your security bureau ready for tomorrow's battle?" Looking at the actual leader of the security bureau, Yang Qindong's tone had a trace of concern and comfort. "Young master, please rest assured that everything is ready. I promise not to let irrelevant people near the gate." Yang San replied respectfully and confidently. "Very good, this battle must be fought with a sense of mystery. You all remember, as an opponent, the less they know about your methods, the more they will be afraid of you. What we need to do is to form and maintain this sense of mystery to the greatest extent, so that the opponent can't figure out what to do." After saying this to Yang San, he said to Tiger's man, "Tell butler Yang Ning to pay attention to the security situation of the Yang family village. Presumably, some people who can't find out about the mercenaries will have their eyes on the Yang family village. These few days, young master, I have to deal with the Walla army, so I don't have time to deal with the matters of the village. I will leave Dao Zhao's second guard team to protect the village." "Yes, young master, I will inform Captain Dao Xiao in a while. However, I think that he will not be happy if he is not allowed to participate in the battle and is instead staying in the village." Tiger's man chuckled. Dao Xiao would definitely feel very wronged if he was not allowed to participate in the battle. Thinking back to the battle of the Tuma Castle, they did not go and instead stayed. Now that they were being asked to stay, it would be strange if they were happy. Yang Qindong smiled at this. "Tell Dao Xiao that the division of tasks is different, but they are all equally important. Tell him not to be arrogant and impatient. In the future, the young master will have a lot of things to do, so there is no need to worry that they will not have a chance to participate in the battle." Yang Qindong was preparing for tomorrow's battle, and he was full of confidence. This was his first real battle in this world, so of course he had to make an exciting appearance. In comparison, there was another army that was also full of confidence heading towards the capital. They were Wallace's 10,000 vanguard cavalry. The Battle of Tuma Fortress was a great victory, and it was unknown how many Ming dynasty officials were killed. If it were not for Yang Qindong's intervention, perhaps even Ming Emperor Zhu Qizhen would have been killed or captured. This battle also made Walla's appetite grow. Especially after Xi Ning defected to the enemy, she revealed many things about the Ming dynasty, including many secrets of the imperial court and the imperial palace. According to what Xi Ning said, the Ming dynasty's civil and military officials were not on the same side. They were very hostile and would often crush each other. For example, the Battle of the Tumu Castle was a conspiracy by the civil officials against the military officials in order to severely injure them. In this battle, didn't a general like Jianghu die on the battlefield? However, in reality, it was true that the civil and military officials were at odds with each other. However, in the Battle of the Tumu Castle, many generals died, so how much better were the civil officials? Again, if not for Yang Qindong's intervention, at least 2 ministers would have died on the battlefield. It didn't seem worth it to use such a heavy capital to design a plan. However, Walla didn't know this. They won the battle and thought that Xi Ning was right. Even when they were fighting against Shi Heng, it was Xi Ning who came up with the idea. First, they pretended to be weak and then baited the enemy step by step. In the end, they defeated the enemy. Because of this, Xi Ning became a good friend of Walla's people. Sai Bian Wang, who was in charge of leading the vanguard, was leading the army to the capital of the Great Ming dynasty. At the same time, he was asking Xi Ning if there were any powerful generals in the Great Ming dynasty that could fight against him. Xi Ning had thought about this question many times in his mind. He had thought of almost all of the courtiers and confirmed that there were still generals who could lead troops, but he could not think of anyone who could truly command an army. General, in the Battle of the Tumu Castle, the Ming dynasty's military officials were all killed. There is no one left who can fight against our Walla's army. In addition, Ingzong went to Nanjing to rebuild the imperial court. The Ming dynasty, which was divided into 2, has nothing to fear. Haha, doesn't that mean that the Ming dynasty's capital is at our fingertips? The wealth and women there will all belong to our Walla? Ah. Xi Ning laughed wildly. He was imagining beautiful women in his arms, delicious food in his mouth, and piles of gold and silver. Xi Ning looked down on the Xi Ning who only thought about wealth and women. A person who was too greedy couldn't achieve anything great. General, now that the Ming dynasty's army is empty and weak, what we should do now is to lead the army into the capital and then go all the way south until we occupy the entire Ming dynasty. Chapter 196. Yes, Brother Xi Ning is right. But this matter still requires Big Brother Yeshin's decision. I think it's better to enter the capital first. The competition king chuckled. On the surface he seemed to believe Xi Ning's suggestion, but in reality he was short-sighted and had limited knowledge. It would be difficult for him to achieve anything great. Seeing this clearly, Xi Ning simply didn't say anything more. Once the capital was truly conquered, leader Yeshen would probably arrive soon. At that time, it wouldn't be too late to make a suggestion. At this time, both Sagan Wang and Xi Ning treated the capital of the Great Ming dynasty as their own backyard. In their view, wherever the army arrived, the enemy would definitely surrender. But they did not know that Yang Qindong had been waiting for them for a long time. Another day, the sun slowly rose from the east. With the arrival of a new day, the capital was extremely quiet. Because of the fear of war, those who could leave had basically left. Those who stayed behind were those who didn't want to leave for various reasons. In Yang Qindong's words, those who stayed behind had a stable mentality. Even if the war started, they wouldn't easily cause trouble. With no one causing trouble in the capital, Yang Qindong had less to worry about, and he could focus on fighting the Tile army. Although he had the Yangtze's new army and the world's most advanced firearms, he still had too few people. Including the 100 cold vanguards led by Xiao Feng, they only had 400 people. Facing an enemy dozens of times their number, they couldn't be careless. War had always been a very serious matter, and it was also the easiest thing to change. A careless mistake, or a problem in a link could directly change the outcome. Of course, Yang Qindong was still very confident in the Yangtze's new army's cold vanguards. They were forbidden from doing anything, so there wouldn't be any problems. What he was worried about was the 10,000 city defense army that the emperor had given him, including the 5,500 soldiers from the warden's office. These people were used to running amok in the city. Bullying ordinary people was not a problem, but when faced with the elite Walla cavalry, it was hard to say what the result would be. Even when they were fighting in a favorable battle, it was doubtful whether they could achieve complete victory. Thus, early in the morning, Yang Qindong had called over the 5 commanders and led them to the north gate of the capital, the Dishing Gate, to stand on the gate tower. Along with the 5 commanders there was a general called Yang Guang. He was originally the deputy commander. When Shi Heng, the commander, lost the battle and disappeared, he naturally became extremely important. Yang Guang was quite capable. More importantly, he had a good attitude. When he saw Yang Qindong, he would call him Marquis, then Marquis. He felt very close. Under his lead, Sun Tong and the other commanders also changed from calling him Yang Ho to Marquis. Standing in front of Yang Guang, Sun Tong and the other 5 commanders, Yang Qindong pointed behind him, which was the empty space outside Dishing Gate. Before long, the Walla cavalry will appear here. A big battle is unavoidable. Everyone, are you afraid? Yang Qindong's tone was very calm, even cold. It was as if the appearance of the enemy was like a story, unable to stir up any waves in his heart. In comparison, the 6 commanders' expressions were not as good. Yang Guang and Sun Tong were still in a better state. At least they could still stand up straight. Tao Jin, Yang Jie, Gao Li and Mao Fushou, the 4 commanders' faces were obviously much uglier. If one looked carefully, their legs were trembling. In this month, the morning in the capital was not hot, but it was far from cold. However, the 4 of them were so nervous that they broke out in cold sweat. This was enough to show the fear in their hearts. Forget it, the 4 of you will follow what we said before. Each of you will lead 200 soldiers to maintain order in the city. But remember, before the enemy enters the city, there cannot be chaos in the capital. Otherwise, if there is a problem, the person who will be punished will be punished. Yang Qindong did not want Tao Jin and the other 3 to stay. Their presence was not only a good thing for the morale of the soldiers, it could also lead the other soldiers astray and make them feel afraid. Hearing that they did not have to face the Walla cavalry, Tao Jin and the other 3 heaved a sigh of relief. They clasped their fists and bowed to Yang Qindong before retreating from the tower. Only Yang Guang and Sun Tong were left. Yang Qindong said, "Vice Commander Yang, you are in charge of leading 5,000 cavalry to remain under the Dishing Gate. When the time comes, when I give the order, lead the army out of the city in pursuit. Remember, without Marquis' order, you are not to attack. Also, when you leave the city, do not go too far. 10 li is the limit. If you exceed this distance, immediately retreat. Do you understand?" Yang Guang, who was called out, was confused. From Yang Qindong's words, he was leading the cavalry out to chase after the enemy. Did he not need to fight a battle? If he did not fight, how could he be sure that the enemy would escape? If they did not escape, how could they chase after them? But while he was confused, military orders were like mountains. Yang Qindong was the commanding general personally appointed by Zhu Qiu. Since there was a military order, he only needed to follow it. "Yes, please rest assured, Marquis. I will definitely act according to your orders." After saying this, Yang Guang clasped his fists and left to make preparations. 5,000 strong horses. This was a number that had been gathered after searching the city for a long time. It was also one of the strongest forces in the capital that everyone could see. Yang Guang also left, leaving behind Sun Tong, the commanding general, standing there with his chest puffed out and his head raised. He also had an imposing aura. In history, Sun Tong had chosen to rely on Jining. He had a glorious time, but in the end, his ending was very tragic. After understanding this part of history from the book, Yang Qindong realized that this person still had some ability. As long as he was guided well, he would become a good general. Thus, he intended to train him and keep him by his side. "Commander Sun, I'll leave the remaining 4,000 people in the warden's office to you. They are all placed above the Dishing Gate. You have to give people the impression that there are soldiers everywhere. Can you do it?" Facing Sun Tong, Yang Qindong gave him his task. "Please rest assured, Marquis. I will definitely do a good job," Sun Tong replied in a loud voice, but in reality he was already very confused. What did the loyal Marquis mean? Was he only leading soldiers to guard the city gates? Did he not need to send people to meet the enemy outside the city? It seemed that he was going to passively defend the city, but he didn't know if he would be able to do so. Sun Tong went to make arrangements, his mind filled with confusion. Just as he was wondering if he would have to rely on the city gate towers to stop Walla's army, a new order came down that left him completely confused. He didn't understand what Yang Qindong wanted to do. The new mission was to close all the gates of the capital except for the Dishing Gate. The only one that wasn't closed, the Dishing Gate, had to be left wide open so that people could walk straight in. He didn't understand why the gates had to be opened. Wouldn't this be allowing Walla's army to enter? It had to be known that cavalry was most proficient in land attacks. If they defended the city gates, they might have a chance of winning. But if they opened the gates and let the people in, wouldn't that mean that they were giving up their advantage? This would only increase the difficulty of defending the city. Sun Tong, who couldn't understand, arranged for people to follow Yang Qindong's orders while ordering his trusted aide to inform eunuch Jining in the palace. The wheels of history were so similar. In his previous life he had relied on Jining, and in this life he was going to follow the same trend. In the palace, all the officials were summoned to the court. Compared to the usual court meetings, all the officials had lost the mood to submit memorials today. Zhu Qiu sat on the dragon throne, but no matter how big the dragon throne was, it didn't seem to be able to calm him down. As if he was on pins and needles, he would move his butt from time to time, vividly displaying his anxiety. In reality, he couldn't help but worry. If the capital fell, it would be the end of his reign as emperor. He would become the second emperor after Zhu Qiu to be defeated by Walla, becoming a disgrace in the history of the great Ming dynasty. Whether he would become a lofty emperor, a prisoner, or even a dead man all depended on how this battle to defend the capital was fought. Unlike in history, Yu Qian, the assistant minister of the Bureau of Military Personnel, was no longer present. Under Yang Qindong's guidance, they did not engage in battle with Walla's army on the outskirts. After Shi Heng's defeat, all the pressure was focused on the Victory Gate. That place would decide the final outcome of this battle. Reporting. Just as Zhu Qiu's face was still filled with apprehension, the soldier sent by Sun Pao arrived outside the throne room. Enter the hall. Jining, who was standing next to Zhu Qiu, was also concerned about the outcome of this battle. This time he didn't wait for the emperor to agree before shouting out orders. At this moment of life and death, no one was thinking about whether Jining had overstepped her authority. Everyone was thinking about whether there would be a result in front of them. Was it a victory? Or had they lost? The soldier was allowed to enter, so he lowered his head and walked into the hall. Soon after, he dropped to his knees and loudly reported, "Marquis of Loyalty has ordered the Victory Gate to be opened. Deputy Commander Yang Guang has led 5,000 cavalry to lie in wait within the city. Commander Sun Tong has led 4,000 some soldiers to guard the gate tower of the Victory Gate." What? As the soldier finished explaining the situation at the gate, the imperial court instantly grew rowdy. How could they possibly open the gate? The Walla cavalry are most skilled in charging formations. The tall walls are our only support. Abandoning the gate tower to defend is simply avoiding our advantage. Minister of War Ming loudly proclaimed in order to show off his erudition. That's right, that's right. Marquis of Loyalty's actions are truly inappropriate. The other officials began to jeer. Enough. The Minister of Rights, Hu Chang, was so angry that his lips trembled as he roared when he saw that the imperial court had turned into a pot of porridge. They were actually acting like commoners on the street. Chapter 197. With this roar, all the officials focused their gazes on him. You are all important officials of the court, yet you are throwing yourselves into chaos like commoners. Where is your decency? Hu Xiao raised his beard and loudly questioned the officials. In terms of age and experience, Hu Kuang had sufficient qualifications. With this shout, many of the officials lowered their heads, not daring to argue with him. But there were also those who did not fear Hu Xiao, such as the Minister of War Ming, who stepped forward with his ceremonial tablet. Minister Hu, could it be that just because Yang Qindong is your grandson-in-law, you are protecting him like this? The Minister of Works, Shi Pu, also stepped forward and said, Minister Hu, now is not the time to be thinking about family ties. That's right. When the country is in danger, we should consider the big picture and put family ties aside. The new Minister of Revenue, Jin Lian, also stepped forward and criticized Hu Xiao. After attending court for so many years, Hu Xiao had rarely been attacked by 3 ministers at once. But in the face of this situation, he had no intention of backing down. Instead, he looked at the 3 of them and said with disdain, "Oh? So the 3 of you should know how to fight, right? If that's the case, why didn't you step forward to shoulder the heavy burden when His Majesty was selecting great generals?" The Minister of War Ming blushed at Hu Xiao's words. He knew that he was the one who should step forward to shoulder the burden, but he did not have the confidence to do so. Now that Hu Xiao had said this, he was clearly attacking him. Minister Hu, we are talking about the matter of the Victory Gate opening without attacking. Please don't change the topic, okay? Could it be that Yang Qindong has already surrendered to the Walla, and as his grandfather you will also benefit from it? Is that why you are speaking up for him? Ming's attack touched on what everyone was most worried about. For a moment the expressions of many officials changed. Even Zhu Qiu, who sat on the dragon throne, turned ghastly pale. If what Minister Ming said was true, then wasn't he handing the capital over to the enemy? Minister please conduct yourself with dignity. Seeing that the emperor and all the ministers were moved by Ming's words, Hu Xiao roared with a face full of anger. Does Minister have any evidence for what he said? Evidence? Of course not, but why is the city gate open? Ming couldn't help but gloat when he saw Hu Xiao getting angry. Originally, he wasn't even a third-rank official, but because of Zhu Qiu's appreciation he was given the position of Minister of War and became a second-rank official of the Great Ming dynasty. But even so, he knew that some of the more experienced old officials still didn't like him. Now he could say that minister who was speechless. In the future no one would dare to look down on him in court. Hu Xiao was an old official of several dynasties and had seen many storms. How could he be stumped by a new noble Ming? Hearing that the other party had no evidence, he couldn't help but sneer and ask, since there is no evidence, Darren's words just now are suspected of framing. The contempt in Hu Xiao's eyes was very obvious when he didn't even call him minister and changed to lord. Ming's face immediately turned ugly when he heard Hu Xiao's words. But before he could think of a counterattack, Hu Xiao continued, during this period of time, who doesn't know that the loyal marquis has bought a lot of property in the capital? Let me ask you, if he didn't have absolute confidence in defending the capital, why would he do this? This might be because he wants to calm the people. Besides, if he has already colluded with Walla, I believe that when the foreign race enters the capital, they won't touch his property, right? Ming didn't know how to answer the question, so he simply gauged the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a petty person. Ah, what a joke. This is simply your excessive conjecture. Presumably the emperor and the officials already knew what kind of person Walla was. He was simply a group of insatiable people. Just think about it, how could they put away their greed for the sake of others when dealing with such a person? If the loyal marquis wants to be on good terms with Walla, he doesn't need to do this at all. Everyone, don't forget who saved Ingzong from Walla. If he wants to be on good terms with Walla, he doesn't need to do this at all. When Ingzong's name was mentioned, the ministers immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. Yes, if Yang Qindong was really such a traitor, he didn't need to do that at all. This reason instantly convinced many people, including acting sect master Zhu Qiu. The loyal marquis saved Ingzong's life, but he didn't go to Nanjing a while ago? I believe everyone can already understand his intentions. This time he's withstanding a huge amount of pressure to fight against a strong enemy. If we still don't trust him, wouldn't it be too disappointing? Hu Chang spoke as if he was fighting for justice for Yang Qindong. In fact, he was also very optimistic about his grandson-in-law. With Hu Xiao's words, the originally excited ministers quickly calmed down. Even Emperor Zhu Qiu was a lot more confident because of these words. He said in the court, yes, the loyal marquis is loyal to the great Ming. No one is allowed to say such words in the future. Now let us wait for the good news. Because of Hu Xiao's argument, the debate in the court was finally suppressed. Yang Qindong, who was still unaware of this, was standing on the tower of the Victory Gate at this moment, looking into the distance. He didn't know that Hu Xiao had helped him block the attacks of the ministers, so he could lead the army in the front line at ease. Of course, even without Hu Xiao's help, Yang Qindong wouldn't hand over his military power at this time. It would just cause a lot of trouble. Standing on the tower, the moment he put down the binoculars, he said with a smile to the 4 delicate women in camouflage clothing standing beside him, you can see now, the Walla cavalry is here. Are they here? Where are they? Hu Xiao and the other women were very excited at this moment. They each held the binoculars hanging around their necks and looked into the distance. Sure enough, there was a burst of smoke and dust and the Walla cavalry was here. With the competition king as the leader and Xining as the guide, the 10,000 Walla cavalry were rapidly heading toward the capital of the Great Ming dynasty. With so many people looking from a distance, it was really a spectacular sight. Seeing that they were less than 15 li away from the capital, the fast horse scouts in the front line rushed back and reported that the Victory Gate in the capital was wide open. The gate is wide open? What does this mean? The competition king was somewhat at a loss when he heard this news. Logically speaking, if the Great Ming army knew that he was coming, they would either defend the city to the death or flee like crazy. Why did they open the gate? This was inconsistent with the facts. Xining was also confused by this news. He had not been in the capital for so long, so he did not know what had happened here. All he knew was that the great Ming dynasty had a situation where two emperors ruled together because of Zhu Qiu's ascension. That was all. In Xining's opinion, having two emperors ruling together was a good thing. When the power was divided, it gave the Walla army a chance to break through. But now that the gate of the capital was wide open, he could not figure it out. Before he could figure out what was going on, the competition king had already asked him, "Brother Xining, why did the great Ming dynasty open the victory gate? Could it be that they want to surrender to us?" This, maybe. Xining did not know the reason, so he naturally did not dare to talk nonsense. He could only follow the competition king's words. Xining was just being polite. To put it bluntly, he did not have any ideas. But when the competition king heard his answer, he thought that he had guessed correctly. He was overjoyed and said, "Ha, as expected. The great Ming dynasty's army is just a scoundrel. When they know that our elite cavalry is coming, they must be panicking. In order to save their lives, it is possible that they will take the initiative to surrender. In this case, order the army to speed up and try to enter the capital for lunch at noon." Hearing the order, the Walla cavalry was overjoyed and eager to go, but only Xining felt that things were not so simple. However, he really could not think of a reason to do so, so he could only follow the army to the victory gate. "They are coming straight to us." On the city gate tower, Hu Yin jumped and said. Then she realized that her performance was a little rude, so she immediately walked to Yang Qindong's side with a red face. Ah! Seeing Hu Yin showing such a cute side, Yang Qindong laughed. He was more proud that the Walla army was coming to the victory gate according to his plan, which was what made him happy. There were only 10,000 city defense soldiers, and they were only a second-line army. Yang Qindong did not dare to have too much hope for them. But the capital of the great Ming dynasty was really too big. There were as many as 12 gates that could enter the city. How to concentrate the troops and lure the enemy to attack was the first thing to consider. In order to achieve this goal, Yang Qindong ordered the other 11 gates to be closed, and only the victory gate was opened. Now, it seemed that he had successfully attracted the enemy's troops. It was only a distance of 15 li. In just a few moments, Vala's mighty cavalry appeared outside the victory gate. It was truly an army of more than 10,000 soldiers. Coupled with the fact that they were cavalry, it gave people a sense of grandeur. This kind of battle formation also scared Hu Yin and the other girls. Everything they knew about war was just from hearing about it. They had never seen it like this. For a moment, their bodies trembled because of nervousness. Yang Qindong had already noticed their changes. He walked forward and gave them a big hug. The warm hug quickly calmed them down. Then the sixth young master Yang strode to the front of the city wall. He looked down and saw Xining and the others coming out of the cavalry. Chapter 198. It was originally Xining's idea to take the initiative to come out. In his eyes, the great Ming dynasty was already finished. They would only have a bright future if they followed Walla. What he needed to do now was to perform well before everything was set in stone and gain more capital so that he could gain more benefits in the future. That was what he needed to do now. Therefore, when the army was 300 steps away from the gate, he took the initiative to ask to be the vanguard and talk to the great Ming Empire's garrison to see if they could enter the city without shedding any blood. For Xining's request, the king of competition naturally agreed. When the two armies met, there was already danger. If someone wanted to take the initiative to volunteer, how could he not agree? Therefore, Xining came to the victory gate with two Walla cavalry soldiers who were protecting him. Xining, who was riding his horse, looked arrogant, but in fact he was very careful. This could be seen from the fact that he stopped when he was 180 steps away from the gate. He still cherished his life. At that time, the most advanced long-range weapons were firearms and strong bows. However, the effective range of a strong bow was generally about 160 steps. It would lose its original power if it was further away. As for firearms, although they could shoot that far away, they would definitely lose their accuracy. It could be said that 180 steps was a safe distance. Which general is on the gate tower? Can you come out and meet me? I am the vanguard of the Walla army, Xining. As soon as he arrived at the victory gate, Xining's unpleasant voice, which sounded like a male duck's throat, rushed straight to the top of the gate tower. Yang Chengwang was still dressed in cyan. After Xining shouted, Yang Chengwang walked to the gate tower unhurriedly and exposed his body completely. He looked down at Xining and cupped his fists. It turns out to be eunuch Shi. I've been waiting here for a long time. The one who came out was actually Yang Qindong. Xining narrowed his eyes and looked up. Suddenly, a burst of anger rose from the bottom of his heart. His younger brother Shi Sheng once had a conflict with Yang Qindong. Not long after that, his younger brother died while performing a mission. Although the report at that time said that his younger brother died because of excessive indulgence in sex with a prostitute called Sai Tianxian, he was unwilling to believe this fact. Shi Sheng could be said to be a veteran in the field of flowers. How could he make such a low-level mistake? His instincts told him that there was something fishy about this matter, and it was very likely that he had been harmed by his enemies. However, because her younger brother and she had offended too many people, it was not easy to find a target. However, he still secretly investigated. Before the results were out, Ying Zong Zhu Qizhen had already sent him to the battlefield, which led to the current situation. Back then, Yang Qindong was one of the people he suspected. Now that he suddenly saw this person reveal himself, how could he remain calm? At that moment he coldly snorted and said, "I really can't believe it. Is there no one else in the great Ming dynasty? How could they let a brat greet the Walla's army?" Xining's words clearly implied something, and also expressed her strong dissatisfaction with Yang Qindong. He said that the sixth young master Yang was too young to take on such a big responsibility. As soon as these words came out, Tiger's Mane and the others, as well as Hu Yen and the other girls, were immediately dissatisfied. As the person involved, Yang Qindong was not angry at this time. On the contrary, he said with a smile, "Duke Shi, you flatter me. As the saying goes, the kind of person you are dealing with depends on the kind of person you are dealing with. Just like the Walla who doesn't know what's good for him and doesn't know how to repay kindness, the great Ming dynasty can send the young marquis to deal with him." Hu Yen and the other women covered their mouths and chuckled at his counterattack. First, Xining looked down on Yang Qindong and then she was ridiculed. It was because the Walla was weak that the great Ming dynasty sent the young Marquis of Loyalty to greet him. The meaning was that the great Ming dynasty would send the kind of person you are. This is called equality. If you look down on Yang Qindong, then you are actually looking down on yourself. This was clearly Yang Qindong giving her a taste of her own medicine. Hu Yen and the other girls, who had long known that Lu Lang's words were powerful, how could they not feel sad for Xining at this moment? There were not many people in the world who could win against their husband in a war of words. On the city tower, Yang Qindong's words of sarcasm and even abuse made Xining's face turn red and her eyes widen. But before she could make any counterattack, Yang Qindong continued, "Your body, hair and skin are from your parents. You don't dare to destroy the beginning of filial piety. If you castrate yourself, how will you have the face to see your parents and relatives when you go to the underworld? This is unfilial. Loyal to the country, you have received the kindness of the great Ming dynasty. You should be a person of the great Ming dynasty. Even if you die, you will be a ghost of the great Ming dynasty. However, in order to survive, you ran to the enemy. This is a cruel and unscrupulous act. This is disloyal. You bully the common people and are greedy. Your parents and family were once common people. Once you gained power, you bullied the weak. This is unbenevolent. For your own selfishness, you actually danced with the wolves and wanted to lead the war to the great Ming dynasty, making the common people homeless and living in misery. This is unrighteous. You are disloyal, unfilial, heartless, and unrighteous people. I don't know how you have the face to live in this world." After a series of hearty and incessant curses, Xining's face became more and more unsightly. She felt as if the blood in her body seemed to be churning endlessly, and in the next moment she would spit it out. Xining's performance was seen by Yang Qindong, but he did not have the slightest intention of stopping. Instead, he raised his voice by a few decibels and continued to shout, "You are a thief. Heaven and earth are witnesses. You are the leader of the thieves." After shouting, Yang Qindong suddenly pointed at Xining with his right hand and said, "If the heavens have eyes, this child should die immediately. He can no longer cause trouble in the world." A bullet flew out, following Yang Qindong's finger, and landed right where Xining's heart was. Xining, who was originally angry, only felt a pain in his chest, and then he lost all feeling. With a plop, he fell from the horse to the ground. Everything happened too fast. When the sniper rifle with a silencer was fired, coupled with Yang Qindong's shout, it did not attract the slightest bit of attention from others. What everyone saw was the scene of Xining falling from the horse and hitting the ground after Yang Qindong asked the heavens, Ning was dead. His body was lying on the ground. It gave people the feeling that even if he died, he could not wash away the sins he had committed. Therefore he could not face others. Ja. The two Walla cavalry soldiers who were originally standing beside Ning saw that the person they were protecting was actually cursed to death. They were shocked and immediately turned their horses back. You are aiding the evildoer. How can the heavens forgive you so easily? Let's die together. Seeing that the fat sheep in his hands was about to escape, Yang Qindong's eyes flashed with a sneer. Then he pointed at the two Walla cavalry soldiers who were rushing back. Immediately the two figures fell from the horse and rolled on the ground twice. After that, there was no sign of life. With 3 finger strikes, 3 people died in succession. This shocking scene shocked everyone. At this time, whether it was the great Ming soldiers on the city tower or the Walla cavalry soldiers below the city, they all looked up at the sky. They seemed to be looking for the place where the gods were. The gods have shown themselves. After the Walla cavalry 3 steps away from the city wall couldn't find the reason, there was a commotion. Many of the cavalry had already reached out and tightened the ropes of their horses. It seemed that they would retreat at any time. Don't panic, don't panic. The leader of the cavalry was also surprised, but as the vanguard general, he couldn't retreat like this. Otherwise, not only would he be punished by the military law, he was afraid that he would be ridiculed by the other generals when he returned. Under the loud roar, the Walla cavalry gradually calmed down. In order to stabilize the morale of the troops, the leader stretched out his waist and pulled out the scimitar. It seemed that he was ready to attack. What? Don't you know how to retreat? If that's the case, then stay here. Yang Qindong, who was standing on the city tower, narrowed his eyes. He couldn't let the Walla cavalry charge. Otherwise, it was inevitable that there would be casualties in the chaos. He had to fight this battle beautifully. He couldn't afford any losses. Therefore, when he saw that the leader was about to pull out his scimitar, Yang Qindong pointed his right hand in the air. The leader, who had just raised his scimitar, twisted his body on the horse and fell to his death. Not good, the general fell off his horse. The leader was already shot in the forehead and couldn't be saved. A few of his soldiers wanted to get down from their horses to see what happened. On the city tower, Yang Qindong pointed his finger again. The 5 Walla cavalrymen who had just dismounted fell to the ground one by one and died. Ah, he's really a god. Run. Under the continuous deaths, the Walla cavalry was agitated by the scene in front of them. They were surrounded by a deep sense of fear. It was as if they were afraid that they would be the next one to be pointed at. The cavalrymen in the front row all turned their horses around. The Walla cavalry suddenly became chaotic. With the death of the leader, there was no commanding general and no unified military order. The consequences of this chaos were very serious. Yang Qindong, who was on the victory pavilion, had already predicted this moment. Seeing that the opportunity was here, he decisively said to Sun Tong, "Quick, order General Yang Guang to go out of the city and kill the enemy." Sun Tong was also stunned by Yang Qindong's continuous pointing. At this moment he also had a feeling that it was a god. He was so shocked that he would do whatever Yang Qindong said. He immediately agreed and went to pass on the order. Yang Guang, who was under the victory pavilion, saw the situation outside clearly through the hole in the city wall. He was so shocked that he forgot to chase after the enemy. It wasn't until Sun Tong ran to his side and loudly said that the loyal marquis had ordered to go out of the city and kill the enemy that he recovered. All cavalrymen listen to my order. Go out of the city and kill the enemy. Go out of the city and kill the enemy. Many of the soldiers saw Yang Qindong's godlike appearance and their morale was greatly shaken. One by one they waved their scimitars and rushed out of the city gate. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.